Chapter 497. Go to watch net. No one had expected that Zhang Tsuni would be defeated in 3 moves, and that he would be defeated so miserably. Even Li Jiandong hadn't expected that Zhang Tsuni would be defeated so quickly. Even the powerful magical weapon of the Sanhuang sword had been taken away by the other party. Although there had always been old grudges between the cultivators of various sects, and no one looked up to each other, at this time, in the face of Xinxiu's arrogant words, they couldn't help but be angry. They stood up in unison and said angrily, "The asterisk starred. What did you say? If you have the guts, say it again. Japanese dog, come here. I'll let you know if there are any masters in the Chinese cultivation world." Xinxiu glanced at them disdainfully. He proudly said to Zhang Tsuni, who was lying on the ground, clutching his chest and coughing up blood, "I heard that there is a saying in the Chinese cultivation world, that is, those who are capable can have the magical weapons of the world. Go to watch net. 7th KOM. Baidu search. I'm better than you now. If I defeat you, will this powerful magical weapon belong to me?" Zhang Tsuni hadn't expected that he would be seriously injured because of his carelessness. Moreover, the powerful magical weapon of the sect had been snatched away. At this time, he was ashamed and angry. For a moment, he was so angry that he spat out another mouthful of blood. Although the little foxes of the Fox Zen school didn't feel ashamed of him, they couldn't help but feel compassion for him at this time. They all turned their heads away and didn't dare to look at his miserable situation. Zhang Tsuni's 2 shitty hurriedly rushed over and held Zhang Tsuni. One mobilized his Jinqi to save him, and the other shouted angrily at Xinxiu, "How dare you hurt our young leader? Give us back the Sanhuang sword, or our Qingyang palace will never let you go." Xinxiu laughed wildly and said, "Is that all the young leader has? If that's the case, what does it have to do with my vows?" Hearing his words, Zhang Tsuni was so ashamed and angry that his vision suddenly darkened and he fainted. The cultivators on the side suddenly exclaimed. Zhang Tianhe and Zi Yuan, regardless of the opinions of their sects, jumped to Zhang Tsuni's side. Each of them grabbed a hand and went to check on Zhang Tsuni's situation. As soon as they picked up a hand, they looked at each other. Zhang Tianhe looked at Zi Yuan with admiration and said in a low voice, "Jinren Zi Yuan, we meet again." Zi Yuan smiled faintly at him and nodded, then concentrated on checking Zhang Tsuni's injuries. Zhang Tianhe saw that Zi Yuan had only greeted him politely and then ignored him. He felt lost and sighed dejectedly in his heart. After checking his injury, she said to Zhang Tsuni's shitty next to her, "It's okay." He was so angry that he fainted. However, Jinren Zhang's injury is a little serious. I'm afraid he'll need to recuperate for a while. Only then did the anxious junior fellow apprentice feel slightly relieved. He glanced at the arrogant Xinxiu and wanted to take back the Sanhuang sword, but he was afraid that he was no match for him, so he said to Zi Yuan and Zhang Tianhe in a low voice, "Jinren Zi Yuan, Jinren Zhang. This Xinxiu is so arrogant, and he has taken away the powerful magical weapon of our Qingyang palace. Jinren, for the sake of the same Taoist origin, can you help us take back the Sanhuang sword?" Zi Yuan said without hesitation, "Of course. How can our Taoist treasures fall into the hands of the Japanese?" Zhang Tianhe also cupped his hands and said, "Don't worry, I'll get the Sanhuang sword in a while." After that, he stood up proudly and said loudly to Xinxiu, "Xinxiu, if you know what's good for you, quickly return the Sanhuang sword. Otherwise, don't blame me for being rude to you." Xinxiu glanced at him and sneered. "Who are you?" Zhang Tianhe said coldly, "Zhang Tianhe, of the Jingyi school." The Jingyi school had been the supreme Taoist sect in China since the Song dynasty. Although Xinxiu was a Japanese cultivator, he was also familiar with the name Jingyi school. He suddenly felt a little awestruck, and the arrogance on his face dissipated a lot. He snorted and said, "Are you going to stand up for him?" Zhang Tianhe raised his eyebrows and said, "Exactly." Xinxiu sneered and said, "It's a fair competition between me and him. I admit defeat. What's more, his powerful magical weapon was taken by me, so it naturally belongs to me. Why are you standing up for him?" After that, He raised the San Huang sword in his hand and said with a smile, "I can't bear to return such a good, powerful magical weapon." Zhang Tianhe was stunned when he heard this, but he quickly said, "Well, I'll fight with you. If you lose, you'll return the San Huang sword to its original owner. If you win, I'll give you my sword." Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Zhou Ping couldn't help but exclaim, "Shitty, are you crazy?" Zhang Ling, who was standing to one side, grabbed Zhou Ping's wrist and said in a deep voice, "Don't talk. Cultivators shouldn't be overcautious. Don't look back when you've decided. If Zhang Tianhe dares to do this, he must have the heart to win. Let's wait and see." When Xinxi heard that Zhang Tianhe wanted the sword to make a bet with him, he was slightly surprised. He looked Zhang Tianhe up and down and thought, the sword in this person's hand is said to be one of the 5 divine swords of the Taoists in the Chinese cultivation world. I wonder how it compares to the San Huang sword? Hey, if I control the San Huang sword and fight with him, I think the expressions on the faces of these arrogant Chinese cultivators will be very interesting. Thinking of this, Xinxi tried to transfer his Jinqi into the San Huang sword in an attempt to conquer this powerful magical weapon. However, as soon as he injected his Jinqi, he felt that the San Huang sword in his hand was struggling violently, and a fierce force came from it. This force was like the huge pressure of an ancient god pouncing on Xinxiu with unstoppable momentum. Xinxiu was shocked. He knew that this was the counterattack of the San Huang sword's own power. He clearly felt that this force was like Mount Tai pressing down on him, and he couldn't stop it at all. He didn't dare to try again. His mind raced like lightning, and he quickly pointed the San Huang sword in his hand to the ground. With a thud, he stabbed the San Huang sword into the ground and said loudly, "This San Huang magic sword is a great, powerful magical weapon in your eyes, but in my eyes, it's just a piece of scrap metal. It's under my feet now. If you have the guts, come and take it." Hearing this, everyone was furious and roared, "Jinrenzhang, go up and teach this little Japanese a lesson. Jinrenzhang, are you going up or not? If you don't, I'll do it." Zhang Tianhe also looked angry. He took a step forward and also stabbed his sword into the ground. He said loudly, "If I win against you with a powerful magical weapon and a divine sword, I'm sure you won't be convinced. You just defeated Zhang Tsuni with your fists and feet. I'll also fight you with my fists and feet and make you convinced." Hearing this, everyone cheered and said loudly, "Jinrenzhang, teach him a good lesson. Let them see the kung fu of our Chinese cultivation sects." Xinxiu glanced at the crowd, snorted, and said proudly, "Okay." Zhang Tianhe stepped forward and stood 3 meters away from Xinxiu. He heard Li Yundong say loudly, "Jinrenzhang, be careful of his Jinqi. There's something strange about it." Zhang Tianhe turned his head and glanced at Li Yundong. Before, Li Yundong had warned Zhang Tsuni. Everyone thought that he had other intentions, and Zhang Tianhe also had this kind of thought. But at this time, he knew that Li Yundong had good intentions. Zhang Tianhe nodded to Li Yundong. He stepped forward and put his hands in a Tai Chi position. Zhang Tianhe said in a deep voice, "Xinxiu, please." Xinxiu smiled. He didn't stand on ceremony. With the power of the great victory just now, he stepped forward and punched. Zhang Tianhe snorted and put his right hand on Xinxiu's arm. With a move of grasping the bird's tail, he took Xinxiu's fierce punch aside. Zhang Tianhe came from a famous and orthodox family. Although he was young, his Tai Chi Kung Fu had already reached perfection. As soon as he put his hand on Xinxiu's arm, the strength of his whole body was like the Yangtze River, flowing out continuously. Everyone pointed to Zhang Tianhe, waving his arms. His 2 arms were always on Xinxiu's arm, pulling him and turning him around, like 2 children pulling each other. Their postures were funny and strange, but no one in the field laughed. They all knew that Zhang Tianhe had already used the Tai Chi soft force to entangle Xinxiu, making him unable to use his fierce strength. It was like a sword that was sharp, but it couldn't cut off the flow of water. Although a rock was hard, it could be penetrated by dripping water. Zhang Tianhe was a cultivator, so he had great strength and thick Jinqi. Once he used his soft force, not only was it powerful, but it was also like a spider's web. It coiled around Shinshioji until his arms felt heavier and heavier. His footsteps became more and more light and loose. His center of gravity began to loosen due to the other party's pull. It was as if he was in the middle of a turbulent sea. Shinsu was shocked. He thought to himself, is this Tai Chi? Didn't they say that Tai Chi has no actual combat ability? How can it be so powerful that I don't even have a chance to fight back? Zhou Qin, who was standing to one side, also widened her eyes. She couldn't help asking Li Yundong, Master, is Tai Chi so powerful? I used to see old ladies doing Tai Chi in the park. I thought it was a fancy boxing skill. Li Yundong saw that Zhang Tianhe did not underestimate his opponent like Zhang Tsuni. At this time, he had the upper hand. He was much relieved and said with a smile, are you kidding me? Tai Chi, Baguazhang, and Xingdiaquan are the three supreme boxing skills of internal boxing. Moreover, there is a saying that if Tai Chi doesn't go out for 10 years, it will kill people when it succeeds. This boxing skill is extremely difficult to use, but it is extremely powerful and terrifying. Ziyuan also said with a smile, during the Qing dynasty, Tai Chi Grandmaster Yang Luchen created the capital alone. In the capital, where there were many masters, he defeated all the masters with soft force Tai Chi. Later, martial arts masters from all over the country came to challenge him. Yang Luchen never lost, so everyone gave him the title of Invincible Yang. Think about it, if Tai Chi was such a soft boxing skill, how did Invincible Yang get his name? Zhou Qin suddenly understood. She smiled, looked at the field, and said with a smile, it seems that Zhang Tianhe will win this round. Shinsu is now like a bug that has fallen into a spider web. No matter how hard he struggles, he can't get out. Li Yundong shook his head and said, you can't say that. In the end, it's still a matter of strength. Many people think that Tai Chi is soft and powerless and can't hit people at all, but in fact, they have completely misunderstood. Tai Chi also needs a lot of strength, but it is a boxing skill that can hit 100 kilograms of strength with 10 kilograms of strength. If you don't have 10 kilograms of strength, you definitely can't hit the opponent with 100 kilograms of strength. But if you have 10 kilograms of strength, but the opponent's strength is 200 kilograms or even 500 kilograms, you will lose no matter how you fight. As soon as Li Yundong's voice fell, he suddenly heard a loud shout in the field. Shinsu, who had been annoyed by Zhang Tianhe's strength, suddenly burst out with countless thick black auras, and strange black lines quickly spread all over his body. Not long after, his skin suddenly turned blue and black, and two black curved horns grew out of the top of his head. The bones all over his body crackled, and his body suddenly swelled up. The clothes on his body also tore apart, and he turned into a monster more than 2 meters tall with a green face and fangs. After the transformation, Shinsu let out a grim laugh. His 5 fingers suddenly grabbed Zhang Tianhe and exerted force. Like throwing a cloth bag, he lifted Zhang Tianhe high and then smashed him heavily to the ground. Zhang Tianhe suddenly saw that the other party had turned into such a monster. In his shock, he felt a shocking force coming towards him. This force was so strong that it exceeded the range of his control. His body was instantly grabbed by the other party, and then he fell heavily to the ground. Zhang Tianhe screamed. All the bones in his body were broken, and he fainted in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Shinsu reversed the situation. He stepped on Zhang Tianhe's body with one foot and laughed wildly. Can this kind of soft and slow boxing skill be used to hit people? What a joke. The cultivators present were in an uproar. Some of the seniors of the sects all stood up and said angrily, Yiksha? This person is Yiksha. Finally, I've made up for the missing chapter. Alas, it's not easy. I'm so tired. I'm going to sleep. 8. Go to sleep. Chapter 498. Go to the net. Yiksha? Su-chan stared at Shinsu with wide eyes and said in surprise, this person is actually a Yiksha ghost. Ziyuan's face was full of seriousness. She said in a low voice, "I didn't expect that there would be a living Wuxia walking in the human world. How dare he appear in broad daylight?" When Zhou Ping of the Jingyi school saw Zhang Tianhe unconscious on the ground, she was anxious and angry. She shouted, "Let go of my shitty." Xinxiu laughed and picked up Zhang Tianhe's body like a cloth bag. He laughed loudly and said, "Take it." His kick was so powerful that Zhang Tianhe's body was like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, he was in front of Zhou Ping. Go to the internet. 7KOM Baidu search 8. Go to the internet. Zhou Ping was shocked and subconsciously wanted to catch him with both hands. However, Zhang Ling suddenly stretched out her right hand, and Zhang Tianhe's body was abruptly lifted in the air, as if a pair of invisible hands had caught him. Zhang Ling's move showed her powerful jinqi and exquisite control. Everyone couldn't help but cheer secretly. Zhang Ling turned to look at Zhou Ping and said in a low voice, "Take him away." Only then did Zhou Ping react and pick up Zhang Tianhe, who was suspended in the air. She glared at Xinxiu hatefully, then turned around and checked Zhang Tianhe's injuries with concern. Zhang Ling glanced at Zhang Tianhe, then turned her head and said angrily to Xinxiu, "How dare a little Wuxia ghost run amok in China? Are you tired of living?" Xinxiu snorted and said, "What? Do you want to teach me too? Okay." Zhang Ling was furious. She raised her eyebrows, and the bright red cinnabar mole between her eyebrows suddenly seemed to turn into a small fireball. Blazing flames were ignited in her hands out of thin air. The temperature of the flames was so high that the surrounding air was distorted. Zhang Ling said that the Lady of the Earthly Fire was not only as fierce as fire, but her control of fire magic could also be said to be unparalleled in the world. At this time, she was furious and took out her trump card. Everyone watched as the flames in Zhang Ling's hand surged out of her palm in the blink of an eye. Then, the flames wrapped around her entire arm and enveloped her entire body in flames. Zhang Ling's eyebrows furrowed, and her entire body was burning with flames. She looked like an angry god of fire. She snapped, "You're courting death." After she finished speaking, she flipped her wrist, and the fireball in her palm grew bigger and bigger. Everyone watched as the fireball in Zhang Ling's hand grew bigger and bigger, making a rumbling sound. It was like a bomb that was about to explode. The pressure was shocking. Even from afar, they were shocked by the blazing aura. Zhou Qin felt as if she was in a big oven, and the ends of her hair were curled up. She said in surprise, "What kind of magic is this?" Ziyuan said with a pale face, "This is the Samadhi Thunder, divine fire. Is Zhang Ling crazy? She will destroy this place." When everyone saw that Zhang Ling had suddenly flipped out and used such a destructive and lethal spell, they were all shocked and shouted, "Zhenren, what are you doing? You can't do that. You'll cause trouble." However, at this time, Zhang Ling's mind was filled with revenge for Zhang Tianhe. The most important thing was to regain the lost face of the Jingyi school. She turned a deaf ear to them, and the murderous intent in her eyes grew stronger and stronger. Even from a distance, Xinxiu felt a terrible heat blowing in his face. In an instant, he smelled the smell of death. However, Xinxiu became even more excited and fanatical. The black qi around his body became thicker and thicker, gradually condensing in front of him, as if forming a black mist. Everyone felt that this fog was like a black abyss. They could vaguely see countless black souls howling and hissing in it, making a sound that made people's hair stand on end. When Zhang Ling saw this, she became even angrier. "How dare you be so arrogant?" After that, she flipped her wrist and threw out the fireball in her hand. Xinxiu roared, and the black mist in front of him suddenly turned into a ferocious ghost with a green face and fangs. It pounced on Zhang Ling's fireball. The malicious ghost opened its bloody mouth and swallowed the fireball. In an instant, the malicious ghost's body began to burn fiercely. Everyone immediately cheered loudly. "Zhenren, good job. Burn this Wuxia ghost to death." Zhou Qin and Su Chan were also enraptured. They gritted their teeth and said, "Burn him to death. Burn this bastard." Li Yundong shook his head and said, Yiksha is known for being able to devour everything. Moreover, this Yiksha ghost is not a real human body. I'm afraid Zhongling's Samadhi Divine Thunder Fire won't be able to do anything to him. As he spoke, Shinsu suddenly laughed wildly. His body was much stronger than before, as if he had absorbed the power of the Samadhi Divine Fire. Everyone was shocked and said in shock, "This is impossible. The Samadhi Divine Fire burns everything. Why can this Yiksha ghost swallow and absorb it?" Zhongling's expression also changed greatly. She shouted sternly, "What kind of monster are you? How can you swallow my Samadhi Divine Fire?" As soon as she finished speaking, Xinyan, who was beside her, suddenly chanted the name of Buddha. "Amitabha, please allow me to say something." Zhongling turned her head and sneered. "What do you want to say?" Xinyan smiled slightly and said, "Fellow Taoists of the Chinese cultivation world, my disciple Shinsu is neither a demon nor a ghost, nor is he a heretic. He is the guardian Vajra of Mount Koya, the successor of Yiksha of the demigods and semi-devils. He is a Buddhist guardian spirit. How can he be a demon?" Then, Xinyan said loudly, "Zhenrenzhong, although your Samadhi true fire is powerful, it can't do anything to the guardian Buddha. Moreover, this is a fair cultivation fight. It's a matter between the younger generation. Zhenrenzhong, as an elder, why are you interfering in it? Is it because you lost and became angry out of shame? I don't think the dignified Jingyi school is so narrow-minded, right?" Zhang Ling glared at Xinyan. She thought to herself, this Japanese guy is right. If I also lose, then our Jingyi school will suffer a great loss this time. Thinking of this, the boiling flames on Zhang Ling's face slowly subsided. She turned her head and said coldly, "Which cultivator is willing to fight with this Shinsu?" At this time, everyone saw that Shinsu, a ferocious-looking Yiksha, had even swallowed Zhang Ling's Samadhi Divine Fire. For a moment, they were all afraid and looked at each other in dismay. Seeing this, Shinsu sneered and said, "Humph, you want to come up? Are you afraid?" Everyone was provoked by him and was furious. Among them, Wang Ling stood up and shouted, "I'll do it." The cultivators of the Jingyi school shouted, "Shixiang Wang, teach this arrogant guy a good lesson." Zhang Ling glanced at him and nodded secretly. She whispered to him, "Yiksha is very strong. Don't get close to him, and don't hit him with magic. This Yiksha is the guardian of the mountain. I suspect that he has a body immune to magic. I think only powerful magical weapons can kill him." Wang Lingfei nodded. Before he went on the stage, he turned his head and glanced at Li Yundong. He thought to himself, I didn't expect that the powerful magical weapon I refined to deal with Li Yundong would be used on the Japanese. What a pity. Wang Lingfei snorted. He walked to the field and took out a short sword that was only half a foot long from his back. Everyone saw that the short sword was red all over. It was shorter than a long sword, but much longer than a dagger. Other than that, there didn't seem to be anything special about it. When Shinsu saw this, he laughed and said, "Such a short sword. Your 3 sovereign swords and 7-star treasure swords are already mine, and now you want to give me another one?" Wang Lingfei was not angry. He looked at Shinsu coldly and said, "What powerful magical weapon do you have? Just take it out. Let's fight." Shinsu sneered and said, "Why would I use a powerful magical weapon to fight with you?" Wang Lingfei laughed angrily and said, "Okay, don't blame me for bullying you." After that, he suddenly turned into lightning and pounced on Shinsu. He held the short sword in his hand and stabbed it at Shinsu like lightning and thunder. Zhang Ling was shocked. She couldn't help stomping her feet and saying, "Damn it, didn't I tell him not to get close to me?" As the saying goes, an inch longer, an inch stronger, and an inch shorter, an inch more dangerous. Wang Lingfei brandished his short sword, and like an all-pervasive mercury, he sprayed it towards Shinsu. A mass of silver light danced among the crowd, almost covering Shinsu's entire body. Even Wang Lingfei's own figure was covered by the silver light, faintly discernible. Some people recognized this move and nodded secretly, saying, "What a good move." However, this Yiksha's strength is great. Why do you want to fight with him in close combat? Isn't it better to compete with powerful magical weapons? Just as everyone was wondering, Shinsu suddenly roared and clapped his hands. His two palms hit the dagger in Wang Lingfei's hand. He laughed wildly and said, "Let's see what else you can do." Wang Lingfei was not surprised, but happy. He sneered and shouted, "Sword Qi River." Wang Lingfei suddenly moved. He split into two, two into three, and three into countless. There seemed to be countless Wang Lingfei in the field. Each of them held a short sword in their hands. The short swords in their hands emitted a dazzling red light, like a torrential river. Sword Qi soared into the sky and madly pierced toward Shinxiu from all directions without stopping. In the blink of an eye, Shinxiu was penetrated by thousands of blades. Blood immediately gushed out of his body. With a roar, he unconsciously released his hands. Wang Lingfei, who was among them, immediately glared at him, stepped forward quickly, and shouted, "Got him." The short sword in his hand immediately pierced into Shinxiu's chest. Seeing this, everyone was overjoyed and immediately cheered. Shinxiu roared, and countless black qi suddenly appeared in front of his chest. It quickly spread toward Wang Lingfei along the short sword in his hand. Wang Lingfei was shocked. Just as he was about to let go, he saw Shinxiu, whose chest had been pierced, laugh ferociously. He quickly pinched his fingers with both hands and shouted the trump card of Jinyan Tantrism like a thunderstorm, mantra of 9 words. Everyone saw that every time Yaksha shouted a word, he quickly made a handprint with his hands. These handprints were the Akalanatha print, the Great Golden Wool print, the Outer Lion print, the Inner Lion print, the Outer Bind print, the Inner Bind print, the Wisdom Fist print, the Sun Wool print, and the Aquarius print. Shinxiu quickly pinched the handprint, chanted the mantra, and shouted, "Lin,
Bing, Do, Zhi, Jia, Zhen, Lai, In, Qian."
Wang Lingfei saw that the black fog quickly appeared in the air, enveloping him from top to bottom. He thought to himself, "Oh no." Just as he was about to withdraw, the 9 words suddenly exploded with a bang. Everyone only heard a loud bang, as if a bomb had exploded in the field. In the blink of an eye, Wang Lingfei was blown to pieces and fell to the ground without a word. What? Everyone was so shocked that they couldn't help but widen their eyes. For the first time, they looked at Shinxiu with fear. They couldn't understand why this Shinxiu couldn't die even when the powerful magical weapon pierced through his body. Instead, he could recite the mantra and seriously injure Wang Lingfei. Shinxiu kicked Wang Lingfei away. He pulled out the short sword in his chest with a ferocious smile and stabbed it to the side. With a thud, the short sword was inserted next to the Sanhuang sword, showing off to the crowd as if it was his trophy. A black fog rolled around Shinxiu's pierced chest. Gradually, the black fog subsided, and his chest was as flat as before, with only a hole in his clothes. Shinxiu laughed wildly and said, "You can't even withstand a single blow." The cultivators of all sects gasped and thought to themselves, "What should we do?" Even Zhang Tsuni, Zhang Tianhe, and Wang Lingfei lost. The 3 of them are the top masters of the younger generation in the cultivation world today. Even if there are powerful people in other sects, they won't be stronger than them. Even they were defeated in 1 move. Who else could beat this arrogant Japanese? For a moment, everyone was in a panic. Zhou Qin couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "Master, go ahead. You can't let this Japanese man continue to be arrogant." Li Yundong's face was as calm as water. He nodded and was about to go on the field when Ziyuan suddenly reached out and pressed her hand on his. Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "Let me go." Li Yundong was shocked. "Ziyuan, you're going?" Ziyuan asked, "Why? Don't you have confidence in me?" Hearing this, Li Yundong was stunned and said, "But..." Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. Since I dare to go on the field, I must have the confidence to win. You have to know that before you defeated me, I was the #1 master of the younger generation in the cultivation world." After that, Ziyuan slowly stepped down from the field. Her figure was as ethereal as an immortal's. She said in a cold voice, I'm Ziyuan from the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school. Please give me some advice. Go on. Chapter 499. Go to Watch Network. She was wearing a long-sleeved white dress, and her hands were gently crossed in front of her. Her clothes were fluttering in the wind, and her beauty could topple a country. She was like an ethereal fairy from the clear shadow palace who had descended from heaven to the world. As soon as she appeared, everyone couldn't help holding their breath. Go to Kanban. 7th K.O.M.
8.
As soon as Shinsu saw Ziyuan, his eyes lit up. He couldn't help but be stunned and exclaim in his heart, how could this woman be so beautiful? Although Shinsu was arrogant, he was shocked by Ziyuan's amazing beauty and temperament. The arrogance on his face was obviously restrained. He sneered at the crowd and said, Is there no one else in the Chinese cultivation world? Why do they send a woman up? After that, he turned his head to Ziyuan and said, I don't hit women. You can go down. Ziyuan smiled slightly and didn't say anything. She lowered her hands, and the sleeves of her hands hung down. Her sleeves were so long that they almost reached her knees, like the sleeves of an opera singer. In the middle of her sleeves, there was a 3-finger-wide purple gold-rimmed ribbon hanging down. Ziyuan didn't say anything, but some cultivators from other sects couldn't help but stand up for her. Hey, you don't recognize Mao Tai. Do you know who this is? This is the great master of our Chinese cultivation world. She is known as the #1 master of the younger generation, Jinren Ziyuan. Shinsu glanced at Ziyuan and said with some emotion, You're actually the #1 master? Ziyuan lowered her eyes, like a jade goddess statue. Her face was calm as she said, No. Shinsu was puzzled. Then why do they say you're the #1 master? Ziyuan said lightly, There are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China. There are as many masters as there are hairs on an ox. How can I dare to be called #1? Shinsu quickly asked, Then who is #1? Let the #1 fight me. As he said this, he pointed to Li Yundong, who was sitting to one side, and said, Is it him? Ziyuan glanced at Li Yundong and said, It doesn't matter whether he's #1 or not. What's important is that you can't beat him, let alone me. Shinsu was furious. Baka, how dare you look down on me? On the contrary, I know you are very powerful, but I have a way to beat you. As for Li Yundong, he has countless ways to beat you. Shinsu was so angry that she shouted, Let Li Yundong fight with me. I want to see what countless ways he can defeat me. After that, Shinsu shouted angrily at Li Yundong, Li Yundong, don't you dare to play? You coward. Do you only dare to hide behind a woman? Li Jiandong drank his tea slowly, as if he couldn't hear him. He turned his face and said to Zhou Qin in a low voice, Ziyuan is good at playing mind games. She made Shinsu impatient. Cooperate with me. Let's piss off this arrogant Japanese and help Ziyuan. Zhou Qin's expression didn't change, but she blinked at Li Yundong, indicating that she understood. Li Yundong took a sip of tea and deliberately said seriously, Zhou Qin, why did I feel like someone was shouting at me just now? Zhou Qin was also very cooperative and said with a look of surprise, Really? Where is it? Why didn't I hear it? Li Yundong said strangely, No way. It was so loud just now. Didn't you hear it? Zhou Qin said blankly, I really didn't hear it, master. Li Yundong scolded, You're a cultivator. I clearly heard someone howling just now. How can you say that you didn't hear it? Zhou Qin was suddenly enlightened. She said with a smile, Master, you're wrong. That wasn't someone howling. Li Yundong asked curiously, What was that? Zhou Qin smiled and said, It was obviously a dog barking. How could it be a human howling? Li Yundong patted his forehead and suddenly said, So that's how it is. I heard it wrong. Your ears are so good. Everyone saw that the two of them were talking as if they were doing a crosstalk. There was no dirty word in their words, nor was there any name, but every word was scolding Shinsu. They immediately burst out laughing. Shinsu was not a fool. He was so angry that his face turned red. he said angrily to Li Yundong. Baka, I want to duel with you. If you have the guts, come up. I want to duel with you. Li Yundong still ignored him. He smiled and chatted with Zhou Qin while drinking tea. He said, "Oh, it's winter. Whose dog isn't tied up? Why is it barking everywhere?" Zhou Qin also smiled and said, "Not only is it barking, but it's also biting people everywhere." Everyone laughed wildly. Shinsu was so angry that the veins on his forehead were bulging. He cursed at Li Yundong in Japanese. Xinyan couldn't help frowning. He shouted in a deep voice, "Shinsu, you're here to fight, not to bicker." Xinyan's shout was like a blow to the head, shaking the teacups upstairs. Everyone suddenly felt a chill in their hearts. This old Japanese monk is so powerful. Xinyan's shout shook Shinsu's whole body. Soon, the anger on his face dissipated, and his impetuous aura slowly calmed down. He glanced at Li Yundong and said, "Li Yundong, let me ask you again. Do you dare to fight with me?" Li Yundong glanced at Xinyan and thought to himself, this old monk is a discerning person. He turned to Shinsu and said, "If you win against Ziyuan, I'll fight with you." Shinsu took a deep breath and turned his gaze back to Ziyuan. "It seems that I have to fight with you?" Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, "It seems so, unless you admit defeat and return the powerful magical weapons you stole." Shinsu laughed and said, "How can I return what I stole? It's ridiculous. Come on, let me see what's so great about you. The #1 in the world. Once I defeat you, I'll see what else you Chinese cultivators can do with your glib tongues." Ziyuan smiled, as if she disdained to say anything more to Shinsu. She put her hands in front of her and asked lightly, "Can we start?" Shinsu snorted, and his whole body was surrounded by black qi. He said, "Come on." Ziyuan nodded and said, "Okay." As she spoke, she suddenly moved and rushed to Shinsu's side like a meteor. With a shake of her hands, the sleeves in her hands rushed toward Shinsu like a continuous river. Shinsu sneered in his heart. Without hesitation, he stretched out his hand and grabbed the sleeve. He exerted his strength and threw Ziyuan to the ground in the same way as he had done in the last game. He shouted, "Get up!" The sleeve in Ziyuan's hand was grabbed. Not only did she not dodge, but the purple and gold-rimmed ribbon in her sleeve quickly wrapped around Shinsu's arm like a vine. As soon as Shinsu exerted his strength, she flew up with this force. Her body lightly swept over Shinsu's head, and the tip of her foot touched his head like a dragonfly skimming on the water. Everyone suddenly burst into laughter. Shinsu was so angry that he grabbed the top of his head with his other hand. However, Ziyuan's movements were extremely fast. Her body was like a swan flying across the ground, and she flew to the other side of him. At this time, a cultivator in the field asked in a low voice, "Why didn't Ziyuan step on the top of this Japanese dog's head just now?" An experienced cultivator on the field shook his head and said, "This Japanese man is very strange. Ziyuan might not be able to crush his opponent this time. Moreover, if she used too much force and lost her lightness, she would be caught by him. That would be troublesome. Look, don't ask." It's not without reason that Ziyuan is known as the #1 master of the younger generation. Shinsu saw that Ziyuan's movements were astonishingly fast, and when she moved, she seemed to leave an afterimage. He reached out to grab her, and it seemed that he could catch her, but when he did, it was an afterimage. Shinsu's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately pulled the purple ribbon wrapped around his hand with his other hand and released the black aura all over his body, which rushed toward Ziyuan along the purple ribbon. However, Ziyuan was not in a hurry. Her feet were either pointing or turning. Her body was either spinning lightly or bending her waist. Everyone could see that Ziyuan was like a fairy dancing in the cold palace. She flicked her sleeves and walked like a cloud. For a moment, everyone was stunned. None of them had expected that this thrilling battle would be so elegant and ethereal, without a trace of murderous intent. Everyone felt that Ziyuan did not seem to be fighting at this time. She was just dancing alone in the field, as if there was no one else around, cold and silent. Li Yundong was a little stunned. His eyes were fixed on Ziyuan's pair of light and agile feet, and he sighed in his heart. They don't look like a pair of fairy feet that should step on the world of mortals, but a woman with such a pair of feet can only stagger through the thorns of the world of mortals. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but chant softly, "Her shape is like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Glorious autumn chrysanthemum, magnificent spring pine. It's like a light cloud covering the moon, drifting like the returning snow of the flowing wind." Everyone was stunned when they heard this. They all knew that Li Yundong's sentence was from Chao Zhi's Luo Shenfu, and he was praising Luo Shen. When they heard this, they couldn't help cheering in their hearts. They felt that these two sentences were simply describing Ziyuan. Zhou Qin, who was next to him, immediately said, looking from afar, "She is as bright as the sun rising in the morning clouds. Looking closely, she is as bright as a lotus." Seeing that Ziyuan had the upper hand, Su Chan couldn't help but feel happy. She said with a smile, "Thick and slender, short and suitable. Her shoulders are as thin as a knife, and her waist is as thin as silk. Her neck is long and her skin is white. Her beauty is unmatched, and her lead is unbearable. Her hair is in a bun, and her eyebrows are slender." At this time, Wan Hongling and the little foxes also smiled and continued the following words one by one. After Ling Yu finished chanting, Li Yundong continued with a smile, "Sigh at the unparalleled gourd, praise the solitude of Petunia. Raise your light gown and stand still with your slender sleeves. Don't be as swift as a flying duck, float like a god, and take small steps like a mountain wave. Dust is born from your socks." After he finished chanting the last word, he saw Ziyuan suddenly stop. She shook her hands, and the purple ribbon in her hands suddenly spread out like a waterfall. Her sleeves were still fluttering in the air, gently fluttering, like a wisp of quiet cloud floating and moving in the eyes of the people. At first, Shinsu tried his best to pull Ziyuan's purple ribbon, but the purple ribbon in Ziyuan's hand seemed to be endless. He pulled 1 meter, another meter, 2 meters, and then another 2 meters. But the more he pulled, the faster Ziyuan twisted. Like a spider weaving a web, thin silk wrapped around Shinsu's body one by one, gradually making more and more ribbons on his body. When Ziyuan completely stopped, he had already become a big dumpling. He had divine power and strange yin qi, but there was no place for him to use them. Shinsu struggled angrily, but no matter how strong a person was, how could he break free from such a restraint? Shinsu struggled a few times and found that the ribbon on his body didn't move at all. He said angrily, "You're cheating. I don't accept it." Ziyuan smiled faintly. "You don't accept it." Shinsu said angrily, "Let go of me. Let's fight again." Ziyuan smiled and said, "Okay." At this time, the cultivators of the Jingyi school and the Qingcheng sect shouted in alarm, "Zhiren Ziyuan, don't let the tiger return to the mountain." But as soon as they finished speaking, Ziyuan suddenly shook her arms, and the ribbons suddenly retracted. Shinsu felt as if he had been pinched in the palm of a giant, and then squeezed hard. He suddenly screamed, and all the bones in his body cracked. Ziyuan shook her wrist and threw Shinsu high into the air. In the blink of an eye, the purple ribbon in her hand was completely collected. Shinsu fell to the ground with a bang, bleeding from his 7 orifices and spitting blood foam from his mouth. Ziyuan looked at him faintly and said, "As I said, I have a way to defeat you. This way is to overcome strength with softness. If you're not convinced, you can recover from your injuries and then go to Li Yundong to see if he has the countless ways I said to defeat you." At this time, everyone seemed to have woken up from a dream and burst into thunderous cheers. Tachibana Wakako, who had come with Shinsu, cried out in alarm and rushed to Shinsu. She checked Shinsu's injuries and found that none of Shinsu's bones were intact. Moreover, his internal organs had all been severely injured by the fierce pressure just now. Even if he recovered from his injuries, there would still be extremely serious sequelae. Tachibana Wakako couldn't help but blush. She stood up and shouted angrily at Ziyuan, "How could you be so ruthless and beat Shinsu like this? Damn it! I want to challenge you."
Yeah.
Chapter 500. Go to Watch Network. Ziyuan had easily defeated Shinsu, which caused Tachibana Wakako to shout impulsively. Ziyuan looked at Tachibana Wakako in surprise and asked, "Do you want to challenge me? In what name?" Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Shinsu is the guardian of our Ragoino. If you beat him like this, he will never recover his strength in the future. You are provoking and violating our Ragoino." Although Tachibana Wakako was quite tall, she was only about 13 or 14 years old, and her thinking was extremely simple. Her words immediately caused the cultivators of various sects to laugh loudly. "You beat our people for nothing. We beat your people, but you are not happy. Is there such a robber logic in the world?" "That's right, little sister. Take this useless guy back quickly. Get out of here. Don't make a fool of yourself." Tachibana Wakako's face turned red when she was scolded by the crowd. Shinsu, who was seriously injured, struggled to whisper to Tachibana Wakako in Japanese, "Tachibana Wakako, forget it. These Chinese cultivators only know how to play some shameless tricks. You are the Witch of Ragoino, and you are also the most promising person to become the successor of the goddess in the future. Don't make any mistakes here like me. Go to Kanban." 7th KOM. After hearing this, Tachibana Wakako not only did not give up, but also became more and more angry. She suddenly took out a gold and silver folding fan from the wide sleeve of her kimono. The bones of the fan were dark and full of exquisite carvings. Tachibana Wakako took out the folding fan and opened it with a snap. There were countless pictures of ghosts and gods painted on the fan. Then, Tachibana Wakako took out a 1-foot-long white flag from her sleeve. The flag was hung with dense white talismans, and each talisman was painted with strange patterns and runes. After Tachibana Wakako took out these two things, her whole figure and temperament changed. She seemed to have changed from an innocent girl to a fresh, dignified, sacred, and noble holy virgin. She chanted a spell, waved the fan in one hand, and waved the flag in the other. At this time, a silver bell bracelet slipped out of her wrist, making a crisp sound as she danced. Everyone saw Tachibana Wakako singing and dancing. The ghosts and gods in the gold and silver fan in her hand seemed to come alive. They turned into shadows one after another and drilled into the white flag in her other hand. More and more spirit she gathered in the white banner, and it gradually turned black from top to bottom. The runes on each piece of the talisman were emitting a strange red light. After dancing for a while, Tachibana Wakako suddenly waved the white flag at Shinsu. The red runes on the white flag suddenly emitted a dazzling light and gathered the black mist. In the blink of an eye, it entered Shinsu's body. Shinsu roared, and his body shook violently. After a while, he actually turned over and got up on his own. However, because his previous injuries were too serious, he staggered a little when he got up. Shinsu gave Ziyuan a hateful look. He retreated to Xinyan's side and whispered in Japanese, "Master Xinyan, let's go. Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon is very strange. She can't be hurt. She will only listen to you." Xinyan glanced at him, smiled slightly, and said, "Shinsu, you don't have to belittle yourself. Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon just happens to be able to restrain you. This is called one thing to conquer another. But no matter how powerful she is no match for Tachibana Wakako. You don't have to worry." Shinsu frowned and said, "But..." Xinyan glanced at Shinsu unhappily and said, "What? Are you questioning my words?" Shinsu's body trembled, and he lowered his head. "Hey, I got it." After that, he stood behind Xinyan obediently, and his body also changed back to its original appearance. Everyone saw that after Tachibana Wakako's dance, Shinsu miraculously stood up again. They were secretly amazed. Someone asked in a low voice, "What kind of magic is this? It's so strange. This Japanese dog is so badly injured, but he can still stand up?" A knowledgeable cultivator whispered, "This is the goddess dance of Japanese witchcraft. This little girl should be a witch." Ziyuan looked at Tachibana Wakako with a serious expression. She suddenly asked, "What's your name?" Ever since Tachibana Wakako had begun to dance, she had been like a witch. Her temperament and bearing seemed to have grown 10 years older. She said coldly, "I'm the witch of Ragoino, Tachibana Wakako." Ziyuan was slightly surprised. "Are you a witch of the Tachibana family?" Tachibana Wakako looked at Ziyuan in surprise. "You actually know our Tachibana families?" Ziyuan frowned slightly, and her eyes were full of vigilance, as if there was a terrible enemy standing in front of her. She said, "What is the witch of your Tachibana family doing here?" When Zhou Qin heard this, she couldn't help but say to Li Yundong, "Master, is this Tachibana Wakako very powerful?" Li Yundong nodded and said with a serious expression, "Japan is a very special country. This country has a strict hierarchy, and there is a great class division in surnames. There are 4 noble surnames in Japan, namely the Minamoto clan, the Tera clan, the Tachibana clan, and the Fujiwara clan. These 4 noble surnames represent the 4 great families. The Fujiwara clan is the surname of a minister in Japan, and it is the most traditional noble family. The Minamoto clan and the Tera clan respectively represent the 2 most powerful families in Japan. Among them, the founder of the Minamoto clan was Minamoto no Raichao, who was the first shogunate general in Japan. The founder of the Tera clan was Tera Qingsheng, who created the era when the samurai class ruled Japan. At the end of the Warring States period in Japan, almost all the big shots in Japan were from the Minamoto clan and the Tera clan. For example, Oda Nobunaga was from the Tera clan, while Tokugawa Ieyasu was from the Minamoto clan. The entire history of the Warring States period in Japan was almost the history of the struggle between the 2 families. As for the Tachibana clan, it represents the gods and witches of the Japanese religion. Since the rise of witches, whether it is the Minamoto clan or the Tera clan, they have been running through the history of Japan from beginning to end. Among them, the Tachibana Remoto of the Tachibana clan is a famous witch deity. This Tachibana Wakako should be the direct descendant of the Tachibana clan. This kind of person is born with the power of psychic communication and can summon gods to possess her. Zhou Qin asked curiously, "But are there no ordinary people with the surname Tachibana who can be a witch?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No. In Japan, there is a special rule, especially for the nobles in Japan. They can't name people randomly. Moreover, during the shogunate period in Japan, there was an unwritten rule that only the members of the Tera clan and the Minamoto clan could be generals. Other surnames were absolutely not allowed. This is why Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who later unified Japan and ended the Warring States period, could not get the title of general until his death. He was only called Sekubai." Su Chan, who was listening attentively, couldn't help but ask, "What is Sekubai's?" Li Yundong smiled and touched her hair, saying, "Sekubai is equivalent to the Prime Minister of China. At that time, Toyotomi Hideyoshi defeated all the vassals and unified Japan. In fact, he was equivalent to their emperor at that time, but even a person like him can't be a general. You can imagine how strict the aristocratic surnames in Japan are." Only then did Zhou Qin understand. She looked at Ziyuan worriedly and said, "This Tachibana Wakako has such a powerful background. Will Ziyuan be in danger?" Li Yundong's expression became serious. He said, "I don't know, but even if Ziyuan is no match for her, she must have a way to protect herself." Zhou Qin knew that Li Yundong had been cultivating for a long time, and his character had become more and more stable. Even he was not optimistic about Ziyuan, so she was afraid that this battle would be a disaster. In the field, Tachibana Wakako stood like a peony and walked like a peony. She looked at Ziyuan and said in a clear voice, "Do you dare to duel with me?" Ziyuan knew that at the moment, even if she lost, she wouldn't lose. She smiled faintly and said, "Since you are a descendant of the Tachibana family and the successor of Mount Koya, I will naturally accompany you. Let's see whether your Ragoino or our Lingong sect is stronger." Tachibana Wakako snorted coldly and said, "It's Ragoino, not Mount Koya." Her words confused many people. Zhou Qin asked Li Yundong in a low voice, "Master, Is there a difference between Ragoino and Mount Koya? Li Yundong nodded and said, there are two religious mountains in Japan. One is Mount Hai, and the other is Mount Koya. In terms of religious power, Mount Hai is the largest and strongest. Almost all the famous monks in Japan come from Mount Hai. But in terms of fighting strength, Mount Koya is the strongest. Although all the monks in Japan come from Mount Hai, they are all buried in Mount Koya without exception, and they are all buried in the innermost part of Mount Koya's Okanoin. Ragoino is a place full of towering trees. Even in broad daylight, there is not a trace of light that can penetrate it. It is dark all day and gloomy. In the forest of these century-old ancient trees, there are tombstones everywhere. Each ancient tower tomb represents almost the most famous celebrities in Japan, such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Yasuji Kenshin, Takeda Shingen, Akechi Mitsuhide, and almost all the eminent monks in Japan. Zhou Qin was stunned. That means, Li Yundong said, this means that those who can enter Mount Koya's Ragoino are all the top masters in the Japanese cultivation world. Therefore, all the cultivators of Mount Koya feel honored to be able to enter the Okanoin of Ragoino. Su Chan, who was standing to one side, said in surprise, then isn't Tachibana Wakako also very powerful? Li Yundong nodded and said, of course. The magic power of the witch of the Tachibana family comes from the gods and vengeful spirits, and Ragoino has been gathering in-chi for thousands of years. There are divine monks' tablets and the tombs of generals everywhere. The murderous aura and spiritual chi in it must be extremely terrifying. Seeing that Li Yundong was talking with confidence and was very familiar with the history of the Japanese cultivation world, she couldn't help but sigh and say, Master, how do you know so much? Li Yundong chuckled and said, if you were locked up in the spirit space for tens of thousands of years, I'm afraid you would know a lot. While they were talking, they saw Tachibana Wakako reciting an incantation. She gently waved the flag, and the silver bell on her wrist rang. Soon, the runes on the flag slowly lit up again. A thick black chi came out of it and gradually formed a human statue in front of Tachibana Wakako. Everyone saw that the statue was wearing the armor of a Japanese samurai. The armor was crimson, as if it was covered with a thick layer of blood. There were all kinds of strange talismans on the blood, and a strong smell of blood could be felt from afar. The statue held a katana in his hand, and his face was hidden in the armor, revealing only a pair of scarlet, ferocious eyes. His gaze was cold and terrifying, as if he was a demon king from hell, sending chills down one's spine. Zhou Qin was shocked and cried out involuntarily, what kind of monster is this? Li Yunyang took a closer look and saw that the various talismans hanging on the warrior's body were all Buddhist demons subduing talismans. He was immediately moved and said, this person has such a strong smell of blood and so many Buddhist talismans on his body. Could he be Oda Nobunaga, the devil king of the sixth heaven, who once massacred Mount Hai? As soon as he finished speaking, Tachibana Wakako said coldly to Ziyuan, Genren Ziyuan, please. After that, she waved the flag in her hand. The terrifying and ferocious demon king roared at Ziyuan.
8. Yeah.
Chapter 501. Go to Watch Network. Seeing the terrifying devil king roaring and rushing toward her, Ziyuan did not panic. With a light tap of her feet, her figure was as light as a swan. She circled around the in-soul of the devil king of the sixth heaven and quickly wandered around. The purple ribbon in her hand was like silk, penetrating into the gap of the devil king's armor. As soon as Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon ribbon drilled into the devil king's armor, countless in-chi immediately rushed toward Ziyuan along the ribbon. It was like a black poisonous snake crawling along a vine, which made people's hair stand on end at first glance. Ziyuan saw that the speed at which the black chi was spreading was extremely fast, almost twice as fast as that of Shinsu. She was secretly shocked and immediately shouted loudly. Jinchi surged all over her body, and the purple ribbon in her hand was like a torrent of a raging river in an instant, fiercely surging toward the other party. In the blink of an eye, the Devil King was firmly tied up. Ziyuan then shook her wrist and shouted, "Break!" With a bang, the Devil King's armor was immediately torn apart by Ziyuan's purple ribbon. After the armor was dismantled, everyone saw that there was no one inside, only a mass of black mist that kept surging. In this mass of black mist, there were countless ferocious ghosts howling and hissing. The black mist kept twisting and howling as if it was angrily reciting the incantation of hell at Ziyuan. Although Zhou Qin was not afraid of anything, she felt cold all over and her hair stood on end when she saw the scene in front of her. She even felt that if she were on the field, she would tremble all over and not be able to use half of her strength, let alone make a move. Zhou Qin couldn't help but whisper, "Why is this Oda Nobunaga so terrifying?" Oda Nobunaga is a famous daimyo in Japan. He has been fighting all his life. He once led troops to besiege Mount Hai, a sacred mountain in Japan, so his notoriety shook the entire Japanese cultivation world. Later, after his death, his tombstone was erected in Ragoino. The cultivators of Buddhism thought that his soul was too evil, so they added countless sealing talismans to suppress and curse him. Therefore, over the past hundreds of years, Oda Nobunaga's soul has become like this, full of resentment and all kinds of vicious curses. Anyone who fights with him will first be cursed by him, and their battle strength will be greatly reduced. Zhou Qin's face was full of fear. She said anxiously, "Fortunately, Ziyuan has already dealt with him." Li Yunyang frowned slightly and shook his head. "No, these evil spirits have gathered their power in Ragoino for hundreds of years. They can't be destroyed by powerful magical weapons and magic. It can even be said that they are immortal." While he was talking, he saw Tachibana Wakako wave the flag in her hand. The armor on the ground that had been torn apart by Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon actually closed up by itself and turned into a terrifying armored warrior again, staring at Ziyuan with ferocious eyes. Zhou Qin was shocked and couldn't help saying, "The devil has come back to life again. What should we do?" Ziyuan also frowned slightly, and the purple ribbon in her hand went back into her sleeve. She stared at Oda Nobunaga's soul and frowned, as if she was thinking of a way to deal with it. While she was thinking, she saw Tachibana Wakako waving the flag again and chanting a spell. Soon, the flag in her hand surged with black mist, and another black-armored warrior appeared in front of her. This black-armored warrior was wearing heavy armor and a sharp helmet. He was holding a Kiku character samurai sword in his hand, and there was a long military flag on his back. There were 4 majestic Chinese characters written on the military flag: Fenglin Fire Mountain. As soon as the black-armored warrior appeared, a terrible sense of oppression came over them, forming a sharp contrast with Oda Nobunaga, who had an extremely strong in-chi. There were 2 blazing fireballs jumping in the black armor of the black-armored warrior. He was like a war soul who had died with his eyes open, eager to return to the battlefield. As soon as he appeared, he let out a terrifying roar, and his boiling fighting spirit made the hair of every cultivator present stand on end. Although Zhou Qin didn't know much about the history of Japan, she was shocked when she saw the military flag behind the black-armored warrior. She whispered, "Is this Takeda Shingen?" Li Yunyang nodded and said, "Yes, it's Takeda Shingen, the tiger of Jia Fei." Zhou Qin said worriedly, "One can't be solved, and now there are 2 more. What should we do?" Li Yunyang said in a deep voice, "If you want to fight head-on, there are 2 ways. One is to use the more powerful power of the gods to break the power of the other party's vengeful spirit, and the other is to use your own jinchi to exhaust the other party. The other party also needs to consume spiritual energy to summon the vengeful spirit. As long as we exhaust the other party's spiritual energy, we can win." The 2 of them whispered. On the field, Oda Nobunaga and Takeda Shingen, the 2 famous generals in the history of the Japanese Warring States period, roared at the same time and rushed toward Ziyuan. Oda Nobunaga rushed all the way. Wherever he passed, black fog would fill the air, seemingly devouring the space behind him. As long as someone got close to him or touched him, they would be dragged into the abyss of hell. As for Takeda Shingen, his entire body was surrounded by blazing flames. Although he was alone, everyone felt that when he charged, the military flag behind him was biting cold, and the words "Fuelen wof 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 wof. Yuan was slightly startled. In the blink of an eye, the purple ribbon in her hand flew out and weaved a large purple net in front of her. The two vengeful spirits crashed into the net. She immediately flipped her wrist and controlled the magic weapon to quickly entangle the two vengeful spirits together. Oda Nobunaga and Takeda Shingen were tied together, struggling and roaring crazily. The silk magic weapon in Ziyuan's hand kept making hissing sounds, and the golden threads on it also bloomed with dazzling golden light. Ziyuan felt as if there were two wild beasts in her net, struggling with great strength. If she was not careful, the net would be broken, and the fish would die. She didn't dare to keep the two vengeful spirits. With a rare shout, her hands shook, and the purple ribbon in her hand was like a sharp blade, instantly cutting the two vengeful spirits into countless pieces. When everyone saw that Ziyuan had repelled Tachibana Wakako's attacks twice in a row, they cheered loudly, especially the young male cultivators. They looked at Ziyuan with warm eyes full of admiration. Zhou Ping, who had always been at odds with Ziyuan, couldn't help frowning. She whispered, "Master, what kind of powerful magical weapon is in Ziyuan's hand? I've never seen her use it before. Why is it so powerful?" Zhang Ling smiled and said, "Wang Yuanshan once picked 2 pieces of 9th heaven immortal clouds from the Heaven Lake in Xinjiang. One was made into a smaller square handkerchief, which is the magical weapon used by Wan Hongling. It's called the Immortal Red Silk Handkerchief, and the other is longer, which is what Ziyuan is using now. It's called the 9th Heaven Ziyuan Silk. These 2 magical weapons were originally immortal clouds, and clouds are things that have shape and trace, but are invisible in the world. They can change into any shape according to the caster's will, just like the Yang spirit. Therefore, this kind of magical weapon can be used for both offense and defense. When attacking, it's like raging waves, invincible. When defending, it's like an iron lock across the river, impregnable." Zhou Ping frowned and said, "But I've never seen Ziyuan use it before." Zhang Ling snorted and said, "Ziyuan has matured early, since she was a child. She is talented, and is a rare all-rounder in cultivation. Wang Yuanshan himself is even more talented. He is a once-in-a-century genius. It's not without reason that he chose Ziyuan as the successor of the Linggong sect. The reason why she didn't use it was to guard against us, so that she could surprise us at the inauguration ceremony of the leader in the future. Hey, I didn't expect that the witch Tachibana Wakako would force her to use her unique skill." Zhou Ping said in a low voice, "It's best if Ziyuan loses. Humph, let's see how arrogant this bitch can be." Hearing this, Zhang Ling was furious. She raised her eyebrows and scolded Zhou Ping in a low voice. The asterisk starred. "Do you think this is a battle between the various sects in the cultivation world? Now, this has evolved into a battle between the Chinese cultivation world and the Japanese cultivation world. This is a national war. It's a small matter if she loses, but she will lose the face of the entire Chinese cultivation world. Besides, Ziyuan is theoretically still a member of our Jingyi school. At this time, in the face of the national war, national affairs should be the most important. Under national affairs, the sect should be the most important and personal grievances should be the most important. I didn't expect you to say such a thing. Have all the books you read gone into a dog's stomach?" Zhou Ping's face immediately turned red from the scolding, but she didn't dare to refute. She looked at Ziyuan with hatred, lowered her head, and stopped talking. At this time, everyone was looking at the field with concern. No one noticed the conversation between Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling. When Tachibana Wakako saw that Ziyuan had broken the joint attack of her 2 undead fighting souls, a trace of surprise appeared on her face. She said, "Not bad. You deserve to be the #1 person in the Chinese cultivation world. You have some skills." As she spoke, she recited a spell again. The two armored warriors, who had been crushed by Ziyuan, gathered together again, and then another undead fighting soul appeared next to them. Everyone saw that this person was different from the previous two war souls. He was not wearing armor, but only a white Ronin's clothes. However, his clothes were torn and blood-stained. His body was full of spears and swords, making him look like a hedgehog. In front of him, there were 7 swords of different lengths. Each sword was chipped, as if it had gone through countless battles. It was as if it had gone through countless battles, exuding a fierce and heroic aura. As soon as Zhou Qin saw the undead appear, her heart suddenly seemed to be pinched by a pair of invisible hands, and it almost stopped beating. A sharp, murderous aura, which was almost tangible, forced her to subconsciously want to escape. Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask in surprise, "What kind of monster is this?" Li Yunyang frowned and said, "This is General Ashikaga Yashiteru, who has the best swordsmanship among all the generals in the Japanese campaign. It is said that before he died, he fought against the rebel army alone. He resisted the rebel army's repeated attacks for 3 hours, and 7 swords were missing. In the end, he died of exhaustion." As he spoke, he saw the long sword in front of the undead buzzing. It jumped up by itself and floated in the air. The sharp blade pointed straight at Ziyuan, ready to attack, and full of murderous intent. Zhou Qin couldn't help but take a deep breath. She said, "There's another one. What should we do? Can Ziyuan defeat her opponent?" Li Yunyang's face was solemn. He shook his head slightly and said, "This Tachibana Wakako's spiritual energy comes from the power of the flag itself. As long as she has the blood of the Tachibana family, she can use it. The power of this magical item comes from the power of obsession formed by the generals and eminent monks buried here for hundreds of years in Mount Ragoya. This power is no small matter. It is as difficult as ascending to heaven to exhaust it." Zhou Qin asked worriedly, "Master, what if we can't beat it head-on?" Li Yunyang said without hesitation, "It's simple. Go straight ahead and capture the leader first. Even if he has thousands of war soul undead, I don't care. I just need to rush to the opponent and take the life of the caster." When Li Yunyang said this, Ziyuan, who was in the field, seemed to have a tacit understanding. She suddenly moved and rushed toward Tachibana Wakako like lightning without waiting for her to take the initiative to attack. As soon as she moved, the 3 war soul undead roared and pounced on Ziyuan. Everyone saw that Ziyuan's figure was like a swimming dragon or a flying phoenix. Although the 3 souls of the dead were fierce and murderous, everywhere they passed was like a fierce hell, and the air was full of the pungent smell of blood. However, Ziyuan was like a fairy rushing into the battlefield of hell. Her feet were not stained with blood at all, and her clothes were fluttering without a trace of murderous intent. Under the joint attack of the 3 undead, Ziyuan's steps were ethereal, and her figure was like an afterimage. Everyone saw that every time the long saber of the undead was about to hit Ziyuan, she could always turn around and bend her waist in an incredible way. It was thrilling and wonderful to dodge. Everyone's heart was beating wildly, and their blood was boiling. Ziyuan's figure was entangled with the 3 undead for a while. The 9th heaven Ziyuan silk in her hand had unknowingly completed the layout and tied the 3 undead together. Ziyuan shouted, "Break again." With a few clangs, the sound of sharp blades cutting steel rang out, and the 3 undead were instantly cut into pieces by Ziyuan. But at this time, Ziyuan's figure did not stop. Her feet flew, and her figure was like an arrow, rushing straight toward Tachibana Wakako. She turned her hand and grabbed at Tachibana Wakako's face. When everyone saw that Ziyuan's move was about to succeed, they couldn't help cheering excitedly. But when their voices reached their throats, they suddenly saw Ziyuan's hand suddenly stop 2 inches in front of Tachibana Wakako. The soft black hair behind Tachibana Wakako suddenly rushed up like an upside-down waterfall. A witch in a white dress and a red dress appeared out of thin air in front of her. This witch was about 2 meters tall and extremely beautiful. There was a white light condensed like a knife in her eyes. Her face was cold, and her whole body exuded an awe-inspiring and inviolable pressure. The witch looked down at Ziyuan condescendingly and shouted in a voice that shook the surroundings, "How dare a little mortal offend the gods of my Tachibana family? You're courting death." After that, she turned her wrist and patted the top of Ziyuan's head. At this time, Ziyuan's whole body was enveloped by the power emitted by the powerful witch goddess. She only felt that her opponent's power was like a majestic, monstrous wave, crashing down on her head and face, and with an unstoppable might, the black mass pounced on her. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Raising a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Raising a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Raising a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 502. Go to WatchNet. Ziyuan saw that this force was so strong that she could hardly move, especially behind her. The 3 War Soul Undead had sealed off all her retreat routes. Go to WatchNet. 7KOM. Everyone saw that all directions around Ziyuan had been blocked by the other party, and she was almost in a dead end. They all cried out in horror and stood up at once. Li Jiandong's eyes also suddenly burst into a bright light. He stood up with a rub, and the Jinqi in his body was about to burst out at any time. Just as Ziyuan was in a desperate situation, unable to advance or retreat, the 9th heaven Ziyuan's silk in her hand suddenly spun under her feet like a sharp sword, cutting a hole in the floor. In the blink of an eye, she fell from the 2nd floor to the 1st floor, narrowly avoiding this move. No one had expected that Ziyuan would be able to think of such a way to escape. They immediately burst into thunderous cheers. At this moment, everyone was impressed by Ziyuan's wit and calmness. Even Xinian nodded slightly and said to Shinsu, "Ziyuan is a little clever." When Tachibana Wakako saw that Ziyuan could come up with such a way to escape, she was stunned and hesitated for a moment whether she should chase after her. But at this time, she suddenly felt a sudden movement under her feet, and then there was a sound of the floor being cut. Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon sprayed out from under Tachibana Wakako's feet like a fountain, rushing toward her like countless sharp arrows. Tachibana Wakako was furious. Her body suddenly floated into the air, and she waved the flag in her hand down. In an instant, the tip of the purple silk was as sharp as a drill, and it stopped in front of her. It kept trembling and struggling, but it could no longer move an inch forward. Tachibana Wakako raised her eyebrows, and her whole body was full of inviolable pressure. She said sternly, "You're courting death." She waved the flag in her hand toward the round hole that had been drilled under her feet, and countless ghosts emerged from the flag and rushed toward Ziyuan downstairs. But just as Tachibana Wakako waved the flag, Ziyuan suddenly came out of the hole where she had fallen. Her eyes widened, and she shouted. The purple ribbon in her hand instantly condensed into a ball, and then quickly stretched out, as if it had turned into a sharp spear. At this time, Ziyuan seemed to have transformed into a warrior charging on the battlefield with a sharp spear in her hand. She spun her feet and twisted her body. Holding the purple spear in both hands, she suddenly stabbed it in front of Tachibana Wakako. Everyone who saw this move could not help but slap the table and praise it. From Ziyuan's sudden inspiration to coming back to life in an impossible and desperate situation, to pretending to attack Tachibana Wakako's feet, and then suddenly appearing in front of her, this move was really beautiful. Moreover, even if the cultivators on the scene were blind, they could still see that Tachibana Wakako was being possessed by a god at this time. Ziyuan was fighting with a god who had descended to the world with her own cultivation power. If it had been anyone else, they would have been defeated at this time, and they would not even be able to move in front of the pressure of this god. However, not only was Ziyuan able to overcome this kind of powerful pressure, but she was also able to fight back so calmly and wittily. Her strength was inferior to others, but on the battlefield, she was not at a disadvantage at all. What kind of outstanding talent was this in fights of magical powers? Everyone cheered loudly, and Zhang Ling's eyes lit up. She shook her head repeatedly and sighed. Wang Yuanshan has really accepted a good disciple. What a pity, what a pity. Zhou Ping knew that her master, Zhang Ling, had the heart to cherish talent. She felt it was a pity that she didn't have such a good disciple. She felt more and more upset in her heart, and when she looked at Ziyuan, the hatred in her eyes became stronger and stronger. Xinyan also widened his eyes and looked at Ziyuan. He couldn't help but exclaim, "What a genius attack! Wonderful, it's really wonderful." Among the Chinese cultivators I met today, Ziyuan is the strongest. She is indeed the #1 person in the Chinese cultivation world. What a pity, what a pity. Xinyan sighed. He was sighing that such a strong opponent was still going to be defeated in front of his eyes. This kind of sigh was full of the victor's condescending disdain and sympathy, as if Tachibana Wakako had already won the final victory. Shinsu also looked at the field in surprise. He was not surprised by Ziyuan's performance in fighting, but by the power displayed by Tachibana Wakako. Shinsu whispered in surprise, "Master Xinyan, when did Tachibana Wakako summon the goddess to possess her?" Xinyan smiled proudly. Among the witches of the Tachibana family, Tachibana Wakako is the most talented. I have always been optimistic about her inheriting the position of the goddess in the future. She has always had this potential, but she is very playful and unwilling to work hard. She doesn't have this awareness. But this time, she wanted to come to the Taoist assembly, and I felt that it was a very good opportunity, so I brought her here. Especially when she was about to go on stage just now, I thought that maybe I could force out her potential and let the true god appear. Now it seems that my decision was right. Haha, Shinsu, it's all thanks to your injury that Tachibana Wakako's potential can be forced out. Shinsu looked at Xinyan with admiration. He bowed and said, "Master Xinyan is indeed the most resourceful monk in Ragoino. It's my honor to be able to contribute a little to Miss Tachibana Wakako." At this time, the people outside the field were talking. On the field, Ziyuan was launching a fierce attack on Tachibana Wakako like a tide. Everyone saw Ziyuan stand up and stab with a purple spear in her hand, but the flag in Tachibana Wakako's hand blocked in front of her. It was as if an invisible wall had appeared in front of her. The long spear fiercely stabbed into the wall, and suddenly a wave of visible ripples spread in all directions. Ziyuan's determined move failed, and the 3 undead behind her also rushed over like maggots attached to bones. Ziyuan was not discouraged. The powerful magical weapon in her hand instantly moved with her mind, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a shield, blocking the attacks of the undead from 3 directions. At the moment of blocking, Ziyuan controlled the powerful magical weapon in her hand and shook it fiercely. The ribbon was like a raging wave, and it pushed the 3 fighting souls away. As soon as Ziyuan forced the 3 undead away, Tachibana Wakako slapped her palm toward Ziyuan. Her momentum was aggressive, and the pressure was difficult to resist. The powerful magical weapon in Ziyuan's hand turned into a purple sword in the blink of an eye, stabbing toward Tachibana Wakako's palm. Tachibana Wakako saw that although Ziyuan's powerful magical weapon was made of silk, the sharp tip of the sword was full of murderous intent and went straight to the bone. Although she was possessed by a god, she did not dare to resist with her physical body. Tachibana Wakako had no choice but to withdraw her palm and wave the flag in her hand to block. As soon as she retreated, Ziyuan immediately won some space for herself. She instantly turned into a flying dragon and attacked Tachibana Wakako from all directions. The powerful magical weapon in her hand was constantly changing. Everyone saw that the weapons in Ziyuan's hands were constantly changing from knives, spears, swords, halberds to axes, knives, and forks. Their eyes were dazzled. For a moment, the cultivators in the field cheered and applauded like thunder. Su Chan's eyes widened, and she said in astonishment, "Sister Ziyuan is so powerful." Is she so strong? Zhou Qin was also so shocked that she couldn't speak. Ever since she had reached the Zhuji phase, she had developed an extremely conceited emotion. She firmly believed that she would definitely surpass Ziyuan and become the #1 female cultivator in the world. Especially in the previous battle, although Zhou Qin had been seriously injured, she felt that it was a proud battle for her to defeat the strong with the weak. But at this time, Zhou Qin saw that Ziyuan was fighting against Tachibana Wakako with the weak. Her calmness and wit, her strategy to adapt to changes, and her control of the powerful magical weapon, especially her use of the powerful magical weapon in close combat, were really wonderful, which was amazing. Genius. No matter how proud and conceited Zhou Qin was, in the face of such a Ziyuan, she had to admit, she is really a genius. The little foxes also widened their eyes and looked at the field. Most of them had heard of Ziyuan's name, but although she was usually a little cold because of her relationship with Li Yundong, they felt that Ziyuan was also very easy to get along with. She was an elegant and modest woman, not like a great cultivator at all, let alone a master who was proficient in fighting. But only now did they know that Ziyuan was so strong. The little foxes couldn't help thinking, could it be that the last time Ziyuan lost to leader, was it because she let him win? Otherwise, based on Ziyuan's current performance, how could the leader have defeated her at that time? Su Chan was surprised and delighted to see that Ziyuan had the upper hand against the strong. She pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said, "Yundong, is Sister Ziyuan going to win?" But Li Yundong frowned and shook his head. On the contrary, Ziyuan has lost. Hearing this, Su Chan and the others were shocked and quickly asked, "Why?" Ziyuan has already beaten Tachibana Wakako so hard that she can't fight back. Li Yundong said in a deep voice, "That's because Ziyuan knows that she is in a weak position, so she has to take the initiative to attack. This is the last resort." Su Chan asked curiously, "Why? If you are weak, shouldn't you defend and fight back?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No. As the saying goes, fighting is like using a weapon, and the art of war is like flowing water, invisible and changing. Only by making it impossible for the opponent to find a trace of it is the best way to fight." During the Three Kingdoms period, Shu was the weakest, but Zhuge Liang's national policy for Shu was that the weaker they were, the more they had to take the initiative to attack. They had to ignite the flames of war in the territory of other countries, so that other countries would not have the energy to take the initiative to attack them. Because once these countries that were stronger than them recovered and took the initiative to attack them, it would be like the pressure of Mount Tai, and it would be difficult for them to resist. That's why Zhuge Liang left Qishan 6 times, and then Jiang Wei invaded the Central Plains 9 times. Zhou Qin listened carefully. She was like a beginner who had suddenly entered a strange world. She eagerly learned and absorbed all the knowledge related to fighting. She asked, "Is Ziyuan attacking desperately at this time so that Tachibana Wakako won't be able to use her full strength?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right." But after a long attack, Ziyuan gradually lost her sharpness. Moreover, her attacks looked fierce, but she couldn't hit her opponent once, let alone hit her opponent's vital parts. And if Tachibana Wakako hits Ziyuan, it will be over. Zhou Qin sighed and said, "In the end, it's still a matter of the gap in strength." Li Yundong's face was solemn. At this time, Tachibana Wakako is possessed by a god, and her strength is several times stronger than Ziyuan's. If it were anyone else, I'm afraid that they would have surrendered long ago and lost without fighting. But Ziyuan can fight like this, with an absolute disadvantage. It's really amazing. While they were talking, the situation on the field had become more and more obvious. Ziyuan's offensive had been greatly weakened, but the 3 war souls controlled by Tachibana Wakako were becoming more and more ferocious. Every time they were repelled by Ziyuan, the speed of their counterattack was getting faster and faster. Ziyuan was almost unable to attack Tachibana Wakako at all. At this time, even a blind man could see that Ziyuan was bound to lose. All of their hearts were heavy. They looked at each other and thought to themselves, How can this Tachibana Wakako be so strong? Even someone as powerful as Ziyuan is no match for her. Who here can defeat her? Is our Chinese cultivation world going to be humiliated like this? Tachibana Wakako, who had been suppressed by Ziyuan before, saw that Ziyuan's crazy attack had basically stopped. This fairy, who was as quiet and elegant as a fairy, was also a little out of breath at this time. Her hair was messy, and it was obvious that her Xinqi was running out. Tachibana Wakako smiled coldly and said, "It's time to end it." After that, she flipped her left hand and waved the flag in her hand. A thick black fog rushed out of the flag. One after another, ferocious undead appeared in the black fog. It was like a black undead chi wall, blocking all the ways in front of Ziyuan and pushing it toward her. Behind Ziyuan, the three undead fighting souls also pounced on her from behind. Another jumped high to prevent Ziyuan from escaping from above. The other one was short and waved a long saber at Ziyuan's legs to prevent her from escaping from the ground again. This time, Ziyuan was really blocked from all directions. She couldn't call for help from the heavens, and neither could she call for help from the earth. Everyone exclaimed. Zhou Qin, Su Chan, and Ron Hongling also stood up abruptly and shouted, "Oh no." There was also a trace of despair in Ziyuan's eyes. She couldn't help thinking to herself, "Am I going to die in the hands of this Japanese?" Ziyuan gritted her teeth and was about to fight to the death, but suddenly, she saw a figure suddenly appear in front of her. The man held the Akalanatha Mudra with both hands and shouted a mantra. Bang! With a push of his palm, his hands were like a shining golden Buddha wall, pushing toward the black undead wall. When the two walls collided, there was a loud bang. The black chi fled in all directions, leaving only the shining golden Buddha wall still standing. Before Ziyuan could react, she heard everyone shouting, "Be careful." The man turned around, put his arm around her waist, and pulled her behind him. At this time, Ziyuan turned around. Only then did she find that the long sabers in the hands of the three undead controlled by Tachibana Wakako had already reached the man's face, only an inch away from the tip of his nose. Ziyuan was shocked. Just as she was about to help, she saw the man suddenly shout. This loud shout was like the roar of Vajra, or the roar of Arhut. It shook the air as if it was about to shatter into countless pieces and fall to the ground. In an instant, the armor of the three undead was shattered by this loud shout. The black chi wailed and fled in all directions. Hearing this loud roar, everyone subconsciously covered their ears. When the undead fled in all directions, they came to their senses. They all stared blankly at the scene, secretly horrified. The three undead that Ziyuan couldn't do anything to before were shattered by this person's roar. What kind of terrifying cultivation was this? At this time, Ziyuan also stared blankly at the young man in front of her, who was gently holding her waist. She saw that the man was smiling at her slightly, and his eyebrows were full of concern. Who else could it be but Li Yundong?
8. Do.
Chapter 503. Go to WatchNet. Ziyuan stared at Li Yundong in a daze. This boy was like a towering mountain standing in front of her, able to shelter her from the wind and rain, able to stand tall and support the sky. Once upon a time, he would ask all kinds of questions about cultivation, and once upon a time, he would scoff at his immaturity and childishness. WatchNet. 7th K. O-. But now, he had grown into such a powerful cultivator. The vengeful spirits that he had been fighting for so long were scattered by his aura with a single roar. At this moment, Ziyuan thought of her master. Back then, her master had been so powerful and reliable. It was as if she could feel warmth and peace of mind just by looking at his back. With him around, the sky would not collapse. Li Yundong looked at Ziyuan with concern. He saw that the fairy-like woman was staring at him in a daze. He thought that Ziyuan had been injured somewhere, so he asked with concern, "Ziyuan, are you okay? Where are you hurt?" Only then did Ziyuan wake up, as if she had just woken up from a dream. She quickly looked around and saw that everyone was staring at the two of them in a daze. Ziyuan blushed and said in a low voice, "Let go of me." Only then did Li Yundong realize that it was inappropriate for him to hold Ziyuan in front of everyone like this. He coughed dryly and immediately let go of her waist, his expression a little unnatural. But at this time, everyone only noticed that Li Jiandong had easily resolved Tachibana Wakako's fierce attack, but they didn't notice Ziyuan's expression. Tachibana Wakako looked at him in surprise and shouted, "It's you? Haven't you already withdrawn from the Taoist assembly? How do you know the Mahamudra Kung Fu of our Xinyan Tantrism?" Li Yundong glanced at her faintly and asked instead of answering, "Aren't you Japanese? It's already an exception for Master Wan to let you participate in the Taoist assembly. Why do you Japanese cultivators want to make trouble at the Taoist assembly of our Chinese cultivation world?" At this time, Tachibana Wakako was already possessed by a god, and her personality had changed greatly. Her previous innocence had long disappeared, replaced by the arrogance and conceit of the witch goddess of the Tachibana family. She sneered and said, "Just now, these cultivators treated you like this, and now you actually stand up for them?" Li Yundong glanced at the people present and saw that most of them looked ashamed. He smiled slightly and said, "I'm not standing up for them. I'm just standing up for Ziyuan and the Chinese cultivation world. Moreover, I seem to have heard you once say that there are no masters in the Chinese cultivation world, right? There's such a saying, right?" Tachibana Wakako laughed and said, "Isn't it? Even Ziyuan, who is known as the #1 cultivator in the cultivation world, is no match for me. Does anyone still dare to come up?" As she spoke, she looked disdainfully at the crowd with a proud and arrogant expression. Although the cultivators of the various sects were angry, the power that Tachibana Wakako had shown just now was at the level of a great cultivator. It was not something they could deal with at all. Even Zhongling was worried and thought to herself, "This Tachibana Wakako is young, but her fighting strength is so strong. If they really fight, it's hard to say who will win, and this place will definitely be razed to the ground. And if I lose, then the Jingyi school will be utterly humiliated this time." Li Yundong seems to want to stand up, so let him do it. If he wins, he can show the power of the Chinese cultivation world. If he loses, it has nothing to do with our Jingyi school. The cultivators of each sect had their own thoughts, especially after Zhang Tsuni, Zhang Tianhe, and the others had suffered a crushing defeat. No one accepted the challenge. Seeing this, Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said, "If no one wants to fight, then I'll do it. I want to show you whether there are any masters in our Chinese cultivation world." Tachibana Wakako sneered and said, "Do you have the right to participate? Haven't you been deprived of your qualification? Humph, you Chinese people only know how to fight among yourselves." Li Yundong snorted and didn't answer. He turned his head and nodded to Ziyuan, indicating that he was going to go on stage, and let Ziyuan go down. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. She also knew that this was not the time to be sentimental. She nodded and said with concern, "You have to be careful. She is really strong, and I don't think she used her full strength just now." Li Yundong nodded slightly and smiled at Ziyuan, indicating that she could rest assured. After seeing Ziyuan sit back down, he cupped his hands to Wan Jinyuan and said, "Master Wan, according to the rules of the Taoist assembly, can I go on stage now?" Wan Jinyuan had been silently watching the situation. At this time, when he heard Li Yundong ask him, he coughed and said, "Since the Japanese don't abide by the rules, why should we abide by the rules?" When the crowd heard this, they immediately shouted, "That's right. It's fine that you Japanese came uninvited, but you even started a fight. Do you really think that there is no one in our cultivation world? Jinren, teach these Japanese a lesson. Jinren, it's up to you." Hearing this, Tachibana Wakako sneered. She glanced at the crowd coldly and said with a sneer, "You Chinese cultivators treated him like an enemy just now. Now, it's as if you've seen your savior. I'm ashamed for you." When the crowd heard this, they felt ashamed in their hearts. Those who had scolded Li Yundong before were even more ashamed. Seeing this, Li Yundong said in a clear voice, how they treat me is our own business in the Chinese cultivation world. It's not your turn to point fingers at us, and it's not your turn to comment. Hearing this, Tachibana Wakako was stunned. She said angrily, "Then let me ask you, why do you know the Mahamudra Kung Fu of our Xinyan Tantrism? Did you learn it secretly?" When Li Yundong heard this, he burst out laughing, as if he had heard the most incredible joke in the world. Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "The asterisk starred. What are you laughing at?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "The disciple said that the master's kung fu was secretly learned from the disciple. Isn't this joke ridiculous?" "What a joke." Tachibana Wakako's face was as cold as frost, and her eyes were filled with murderous intent. Our Xinyan Tantrism was founded by Master Hirofa in the 7th year of Hongren, that is, 816 AD. At that time, there was the mantra Mahamudra Kung Fu. How dare you say that we secretly learned it from you? Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then, do you know the origin of Master Hirofa, who his master is, and where he learned the mantra's secret method?" When Xinyan heard this, he thought to himself, "Oh no, Tachibana Wakako is now possessed by the spirit of the Tachibana witch and is not good at arguing. Why did she bring up this topic? Isn't this asking for trouble?" Just as Xinyan was about to change the topic, Li Yundong said in a clear voice, as the successor of Xinyan Tantrism and the Witch of Mount Koya, "You don't know the origin of the ancestor, nor do you know the origin of your kung fu? This is ridiculous." Li Yundong said with confidence, "Let me tell you. The founder of Mount Koya's Xinyan Tantrism, Master Hirofa, was born in Pingfengpu, Hongtian Township, Tadu County, Japan, which is now Shantanji City, Kagawa Prefecture, Shikoku Island. His father is Duke Zabo, and his mother is Ah Dao. Am I right?" Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Don't I know? Do I need you to teach me?" Li Yundong glanced at her sideways, smiled slightly, and said, "Master Hirofa has been intelligent since he was a child. When he was 5 or 6 years old, he had a reputation as a child prodigy. At the age of 15, he entered the capital, Nagaoka, and followed his uncle, Ah Dao, to learn Chinese articles such as the Analects of Confucius, the Book of Filial Piety, and historical biography. At the age of 18, he entered the Ming Classics Department of Beijing University and studied Mao poetry and other classics and history. He also devoted himself to creating a book that explained the relationship between Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, that is, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism." Tachibana Wakako was impatient. She shouted, "You're so long-winded. What do you want to say?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Don't worry, I haven't gotten to the point yet. When Master Hirofa was 20 years old, he shaved his head and became a monk at Mount Weishan Temple in Wakazumi. At that time, his Dharma name was Teaching. 2 years later, he changed his Dharma name to Konghai. At the age of 30, Master Hirofa found the Mahavairokkana Sutra under the East Tower of Kumi Temple in Nara. He studied it hard, but he couldn't understand it. So he decided to go to the Tang dynasty to learn the true method. So, Master Hirofa came to China in the 23rd year of the Japanese calendar. In the first year of Yongjin of the Tang dynasty, he became the disciple of Huiguo Ali, the 7th patriarch of Tangmi at that time. In early June of that year, Master Hirofa was born in the Great Mandala of the Tibetan realm and received the enlightenment of the 5 tribes. In early July, Master Hirofa was born in the Great Mandala of the Vajra realm and received the enlightenment of the 5 tribes. In early August, he received the enlightenment of Dharma Ali. In the 3rd month of the 2nd year, Huiguo Dashi imparted the 2 secret manuals and the altar instrument seal to Hongfa Dashi, and then he imparted to Hongfa Dashi the 10 drawings of the Womb realm, the Vajra realm, and the other Great Mandala, the Diamond Crown Scripture, and the other secret scriptures, and 15 newly created props to Hongfa Dashi. At this time, Master Hirofa had already received the true teachings of our Chinese Buddhism Tangmi, so he was also called the 8th generation patriarch of our Chinese Tangmi. Li Yunyang spoke with confidence and composure in the field, clearly describing the life of Master Hirofa. Although many cultivators of the Taoist sects were familiar with the history of the cultivation world, most of them were Taoists, especially the history of the cultivation world in Japan. Some of them didn't know much about it. At this time, they suddenly understood. Oh, it turns out that the ancestor of this group of Japanese was our primary school student. Some people laughed loudly and said, "Japanese, you learned your kung fu from us. What are you so proud of?" Tachibana Wakako was a little dazed when she heard this, and her face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. Xinyan felt bad in his heart. He chanted the name of Buddha and said loudly, "Jinren Li, what you said before was right." But after Master Huigua Ali passed on the true method to Master Hirofa, Emperor Wuzong of the Tang dynasty began to promote Taoism and prohibit Buddhism. Taoism flourished, but Buddhism encountered a disaster. From then on, Xinyan Tantrism declined in the Tang dynasty and disappeared in China. Instead, it flourished in Mount Koya in Japan. Your Chinese cultivation world has always known internal strife, but you don't know how to cherish it. We have helped you preserve your inheritance to this day. Don't you know how to thank us? Li Yundong smiled coldly and said loudly, "Oda Nobunaga during the Warring States period of Japan once burned Mount High. He ordered his army to kill anyone they saw. Whether it was civil or military monks, women, children, or some heads could be reported to him. The slightly beautiful women and children were left to reward the army, and the rest were all killed. As many as 4,000 to 5,000 people died in this disaster, and the corpses were scattered all over the mountain. Oda Nobunaga also set fire to the Central Hall and the 21 societies of the Mountain King in Yanli Temple. The Buddha statues and scriptures that had been collected for more than 100 years were completely burned. Mount High, the holy land of Japanese Buddhism, was burned to ruins. Such a great disaster is unheard of in our Chinese cultivation world. Do you have the nerve to blame us? Xinyan was furious, but he knew that Li Yundong's words were exactly the same. He wanted to refute, but he couldn't. He could only say, "The Buddhist incantation of 9 words is the original magic of our Xinyan Tantrism." Jinren Li, how do you explain it? Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you really sure that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words was created by you?" He turned around and said loudly to everyone present, "I believe that everyone knows that Tangmi is not the only one who has the mantra Mahamudra. Songmi also has it. The Japanese Xinyan Tantrism, that is Dongmi, also has it. The mantra Mahamudra is divided into the 6-word mantra and the 9-word mantra. The 6-word mantra is Da, Ma, and I, Padmi, which is mostly used by Xinyan Tantrism and Tangmi. The 9-word mantra is Lin Bing, Do Zhe Jie Xinyan formation, which is mainly used by Dongmi. The 6-word mantra originated from the Bodhisattva mantra, so it is also known as the 6-word Great Bright Mantra. Do you know where the 9-word mantra originated from?" Everyone saw that Li Yundong was quoting scriptures on the field. He was eloquent and eloquent. He was really in high spirits and full of energy. Although they had a lot of dirty things with Li Yundong before, at this time, in front of the enemy, everyone had a common enemy. They all responded, "Jinren Li, tell us quickly. Don't keep us guessing." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said loudly to Xinyan, "The 9-word mantra that your Xinyan Tantrism is most proud of originated from our Taoist school." This sentence caused an uproar among many cultivators. Some cultivators were stunned and said, "No way, the 9-word mantra of Xinyan Tantrism originated from our Taoist school? Why didn't I know? This is funny. My son beat me. That's not the funniest thing. The funniest thing is that I was beaten by my son, but I didn't know that the kung fu that my son beat me was learned from me. Alas, I'm wronged. I'm really wronged. This beating is too unjust. Damn it, these little Japanese are really a group of sons of bitches. They even beat me." For a moment, everyone was talking about it and laughing. When Tachibana Wakako, Shinsu, and Xinyan heard Li Yundong's words, they were all furious. Li Yundong said that the trump card created by Master Hongfa of Xinyan Tantrism originated from their Taoist school. 8 degree. Chapter 504. Go to Watch Network. Xinyan shouted at Li Yundong with a face full of anger. ****, how dare you say that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words created by our Grandmaster, Master Hongfa, came from your Taoist school? How ridiculous and shameless. Tachibana Wakako also rebuked angrily. How dare you? This is a rude offense to our Mount Koya. You must pay the price. Li Yundong scoffed at their accusations and anger. He cupped his hands and said to the crowd, "Everyone, I wonder if anyone has read Gohong's book Biopuzi." The cultivators of the various sects laughed. Some of them were angry and laughed at Li Yundong. "Generally, you look down on us too much. Biopuzi is an introductory book for cultivation, only below the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor. Since we are cultivators, how could we not have read it?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Since everyone has read it, I believe everyone knows that there is a saying in Biopuzi, inner part, etc., that it is appropriate to know the secret of Liujia before entering the mountain." Zhu said, "Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation." Often when the secret blessing is given, there is nothing that cannot be avoided. I wonder if you have any impression of this sentence? Immediately, a cultivator said curiously, "There is indeed such a sentence, but Shinran Li, what does this sentence have to do with brother-in-law Jin Yuan?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Master Hongfa of Japan brought back many classic works from our mainland of China. When he was studying in China, he was also deeply influenced by Taoism, so he once copied the inner part of Gohong's Biopuzi. But who would have thought that he would be dazzled and actually copy the sentence, Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation, into Lin Bing and Do, all go forward in formation? So when he went back, he accidentally created the so-called Buddhist incantation of 9 words of Dongmi. It's really a coincidence." Li Yundong's words made everyone laugh out loud, and some cultivators even fell down laughing. Go to the network. They all knew what Gohong had said, but none of them had expected that Li Yundong would say that this sentence was the source of the Buddhist incantation of 9 words of Dongmi. Zhang Ling looked at Li Yundong, amused and annoyed at the same time. She shook her head and said, "Young people are really fearless. They dare to say anything. Ridiculous, really ridiculous." Li Yundong's words caused everyone to burst into laughter, but Xinyan, Tachibana Wakako, and the others were so angry that their bodies trembled. Xinyan saw that Li Yundong's words were really unconstrained and boundless. He had actually described the founder of Jinyan Tantrism, Master Hongfa, as a cultivator with blurred eyes and crooked hands. The most terrible thing was that he had even quoted scriptures and had eyes and nose. No one would not believe him. Xinyan said angrily, "You Chinese cultivators should watch your words. Some things can't be said carelessly. You said that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words was copied wrongly by Master Hongfa. Do you have any evidence to prove this?" Li Yundong smiled and asked, "No. However, do you have any evidence to prove that Master Hongfa didn't copy wrongly at that time?" When Li Yundong said that the Buddhist incantation of 9 words came from the book Biopuzi, some old and prudent cultivators shook their heads secretly, feeling that it was a little inappropriate. However, when Li Yundong said these words, even the most profound people couldn't help shaking their heads and laughing, and some other young cultivators even laughed wildly. Wan Hongling, who was sitting not far away, laughed out loud. She took Ziyuan's arm and whispered, "Ziyuan Shiji, Li Yundong is making trouble again. I thought that when his cultivation was higher, he would be more like a great cultivator. I didn't expect that a leopard can't change its spots." Last time on Mount Tianlong, he asked the cultivators present to hand over the evidence of Ao Wushuang and Renyuan Jindan. I almost died of laughter. I didn't expect that this time he would do such a shameless thing without any evidence. Ziyuan also broke into a smile and said with a smile, "This is the nature of a great cultivator. Freedom is the true way. Not sticking to one pattern is the way of immortality." Wan Hongling laughed in a low voice and said, "Is this kind of shameless way of immortality? Ziyuan Shiji, I think you have him in your heart. Naturally, everything he says is the true way, and everything he does is the way of immortality. He. Ziyuan suddenly glared at Wan Hongling with shame and anger, and scolded in a low voice. Shut up. Is this the place to say such things? Wan Hongling made a face at her, and said, Well, I'll go back and talk about it. Ziyuan was so angry that her neck turned red. She turned her head away, and stopped looking at Wan Hongling. But when she looked at Li Yundong, her usually calm and indifferent eyes could no longer calm down. When Xinyan heard Li Yundong's words, even though his cultivation was deep and he was very calm, he couldn't help but be so angry that his nose was almost crooked. He suddenly became furious and flicked his sleeves, saying, You only know how to take advantage of an ignorant child. Damn it. Tachibana Wakako's eyebrows were raised, and her eyes were full of murderous intent as she shouted at Li Yundong, How dare you speak so carelessly? Li Yundong sneered without showing any weakness and said, Then how dare you say that there are no masters in the Chinese continent? Tachibana Wakako laughed angrily and said, Haha, the cultivators in the Chinese continent who call themselves masters are vulnerable. Even Ziyuan, who is known as the number one, is no match for me. How dare you call yourself a master like this? Li Yundong snorted and said, The divine land of China is thousands of miles away, and there are many hidden dragons and crouching tigers. I don't know how many masters are cultivating in seclusion. How dare you be so arrogant after defeating a few young people? You are really arrogant and ignorant. If our Chinese cultivation sects really send out masters, they can crush you with one finger. When the cultivators of the various sects saw that Li Yundong did not care about the past and helped them to smooth things over, they were both impressed and grateful. They couldn't help but cheer loudly. Shinrenli, well said. Tachibana Wakako sneered and said, Does defeating you prove that there are no masters in the Chinese continent? Li Yundong sneered and said, Even if you defeat me, it doesn't prove anything. Because there are so many talents and heroes in the Chinese continent. I believe that there must be many hidden masters who are much stronger than me. How can I dare to claim to be the best? Besides, with your kung fu, you can't defeat me, let alone those great cultivators who stand aloof from the world. Tachibana Wakako was furious. She snorted and said angrily, Well, I want to see how you are better than me. After that, she opened the gold and silver fan in her hand and threw it in front of her. The countless ghosts drawn on the fan began to move along with the black mist flowing on the fan, as if the fan was a gate leading to the underworld, and the black mist seemed to be guiding these demons and ghosts. These demons and ghosts followed the black mist and walked down the fan one by one. For a time, hundreds of ghosts surged out, and the downstairs was full of gloomy qi. The roars of ghosts and the wails of ghosts were everywhere, which made people's hair stand on end. When the cultivators saw that Li Yundong had the upper hand in the argument, on the one hand, they felt extremely relieved, but on the other hand, they were a little worried. Li Yundong's fighting strength was indeed strong, but Tachibana Wakako had the power of a god. No matter how powerful Li Yundong was, how could he be an enemy of a god? When Zhongling, Du Fei, and the other experienced and prudent cultivators saw that Tachibana Wakako was continuously releasing demons and ghosts, they all said to Li Yundong loudly, Jinren, hit her in the middle. Don't let her release all these ghosts. Ziyuan couldn't help shouting, Li Yundong, don't be careless. However, Li Yundong seemed to turn a deaf ear to her. He squinted at Tachibana Wakako, as if he was waiting for her to use all her strength so that she would be convinced of her defeat. Seeing that Li Yundong was so arrogant, Tachibana Wakako became even angrier. The sound of her chanting seemed to make everything around her tremble. As Tachibana Wakako recited the spell, not only did the war soul undead she had summoned become more and more ferocious and terrifying, but even the demons and ghosts walking down from the fan became bloodshot. They stared at Li Yundong in unison, as if they were a group of devils who would choose people to devour at any time. Everyone saw that there were so many demons and ghosts standing on the field. Not to mention fighting, they could crush people to death if they rushed up. Those who were timid would have been scared to the point of peeing their pants. How could they have the strength to resist? With a loud shout, Tachibana Wakako waved the flag in her hand, pointed at Li Yundong, and shouted, "Dies!" In an instant, all kinds of demons and ghosts roared and pounced on Li Yundong. Although the people on the sidelines knew that these ghosts were not pouncing on them, they still couldn't help but turn blue with fear and take a few steps back. Some arrogant cultivators couldn't help but think, so many demons and ghosts are pouncing on me. If it were me, how would I resist them? Li Yundong sneered. He quickly pinched his fingers, and his 5 fingers turned into a few residual shadows. He quickly pushed his palm forward and made 3 Mahamudra in a row. These 3 Mahamudra were the Mahamudra of Vairocana, the Samaya Mahamudra of the Vajra realm, and the immovable fundamental seal. Li Yundong blasted out these 3 Mahamudra, but they only slapped in front of him. Golden light shot out from his hand, and a Mahamudra stopped in the air as if it was frozen and suspended. The golden light emitted a dazzling light, like a golden wall of light. As soon as the ghosts summoned by Tachibana Wakako touched these powerful Mahamudra, they immediately wailed and turned into a puff of green smoke. It was as if snow had met the scorching sun and melted at the first touch. Tachibana Wakako was shocked. She said in shock, "Impossible. How can you break my night walk of 100 ghosts?" Li Yundong laughed loudly and said, "I have the 7 treasures of Buddha Dharma, and I also have the Taoist cosmic divine power. The righteousness of heaven and earth gathers in my heart, and the divine power of Buddha Dharma is hidden in the Lingtai. How can I be afraid of a little demon like you? Not to mention 100 ghosts. Even if thousands of ghosts come at me together, I will still be like a cool breeze blowing on a hill, unmoving." A terrifying light burst out of Tachibana Wakako's eyes. She said sternly, "How dare you? How dare you be so arrogant?" After that, her long black hair suddenly rushed up, and she waved the flag in her hand again. This time, what appeared in front of her were shining golden Vajra arhats. These Vajra arhats were in different postures. Some were holding Vajra scepters, and some were holding demon-subduing sticks. All of them were powerful and looked at Li Yundong with a murderous look. Su Chan, who was looking at the field worriedly, couldn't help but be shocked. What is this? How can she summon ghosts, and Arhut Vajra? Ziyuan frowned. She took a deep breath and said, "The power of the Tachibana family is divided into 3 kinds. One is to summon the souls of the dead and ghosts to fight for them. The other is more superior, which is to summon the Vajra Arhot worshipped in Li Goino to fight for them. The best is to directly summon the gods to take over and personally participate in the battle." Su Chan asked worriedly, "Can Yundong win?" Ziyuan had always been very confident in Li Yundong, but at this time, she couldn't help but be a little shaken. She said nervously, "I don't know. If it were the old Li Yundong, he would have no chance of winning at all. But after he came out of the spirit space, I don't know how strong he has become.
So I don't know either."
Su Chan, Zhou Qin, Ziyuan, and the others all clenched their fists and looked at the field. They were extremely worried, and the cultivators of all the sects present also looked frightened. They saw that these Arhats and Vajras were all chanting scriptures, as if the small building had suddenly turned into a Buddhist land. The weapons in their hands were shining, and their bodies were full of pure and majestic Buddhist power. This was the power formed by the powerful spiritual power of the eminent monks of all generations who had been worshipped in Li Goino for 1,200 years. Wei Qing of the Chuanjin Dragon sect looked at the field with her eyes wide open. She said, "It's already very exaggerated that Li Yundong can resist 100 ghosts. But there are so many Vajra Arhats in front of him. How can he resist them?" Yu Sheng also took a deep breath and said, "As long as he is righteous and has a strong will, it's understandable that he won't be harmed by the Yin Qi with a mouthful of primordial Qi in his mouth. But this is the Vajra of Buddhism, the Shentong Arhot. How can he fight against such pure Buddhist power?" Du Fei looked at the field in shock and murmured, "This seems to be the Vajra exorcism formation of Buddhism. How could this Japanese use such a powerful magic? Is the Chinese cultivation world going to be humiliated like this today?"
8, yeah.
Chapter 505. Go to Watch Network. Li Yunyang saw the majesty of the Vajra demon subduing formation and the bursts of golden light, but his expression did not change. He smiled slightly, put his palms together, and then flipped his fingers like a blooming lotus. A small vermilion ball of light was rolling in his palm, rolling between his palms. Go to Kanban. 7 KOM. Li Yundong didn't seem to feel the astonishing pressure of the opponent's Vajra demon subduing formation. He smiled and said, "Give up. Your demon subduing formation can subdue others, but it can't subdue me." Tachibana Wakako smiled coldly. How could she believe it? With a wave of the flag in her hand, a Vajra immediately pounced on Li Yundong aggressively. This Vajra was covered in golden armor and held 2 Vajra pestles in his hands. He was about 2 meters tall. As soon as he moved, he was like a jade pillar that could push a golden mountain, rumbling and pressing down. The Vajra glared angrily, and his face was fierce. He waved the Vajra pestle in his hand and smashed it toward Li Yundong. His strength was fierce, and his momentum was so fierce that the cultivators present felt fear in their hearts when they saw him from afar. They didn't dare to fight with him. However, Li Yundong didn't dodge. He formed a palm with one hand and pushed it forward, as if he wanted to resist the attack of the Vajra pestle with his bare hands. When the cultivators present saw this, they were all shocked. They shouted, "Jinren Li, be careful." When Xinyan and Shinsu saw this, they were both overjoyed. Tachibana Wakako even laughed out loud. The Vajra pestle of the Treasure Division is invincible. It specializes in breaking all the defenses in the world. Are you courting death? But as soon as she finished speaking, she saw that the Vajra pestle in the Vajra's hand was less than an inch away from Li Yundong's palm, and then it stopped abruptly. Everyone saw that no matter how much the Vajra roared, the Vajra pestle seemed to have encountered an invisible wall and could not break through. Xinyan and Shinsu were shocked at the same time. Shinsu exclaimed, "That's impossible. What kind of cultivation method is this person using? How could it possibly block the Vajra pestle of the Wisdom Vajra?" Xinyan was also shocked. "No way? Who is he? How could it possibly withstand the powerful attack of our Mount Guardian deity?" When Tachibana Wakako saw that Li Yundong had blocked the blow so easily, she was stunned, but soon became angry out of shame. She directed the surrounding Vajra arhats to pounce on Li Yundong like a tide. Everyone saw that some of these Vajras were slashing fiercely with sabers, some were smashing wildly with Vajra wheels, some were slapping toward Li Yundong one after another, and some were chanting incantations, releasing spells of the 5 elements one after another toward Li Yundong. This storm-like attack almost engulfed Li Yundong's figure. It was as if a terrifying tsunami had appeared out of thin air upstairs, wave after wave, as if it would never stop until the enemy was destroyed. Li Yundong was in the middle of the stormy waves. His expression did not change, and there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. He always had one hand in front of him, the palm facing up, dragging the rolling red bead in his palm. The other hand was standing like a palm, constantly moving like a wall to block the attacks from all directions. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's movements were extremely fast. He kept blocking with one hand, but he was able to block the attacks from all directions, as if he had countless arms all over his body. Wherever Li Yundong's vertical palm moved, the fierce Vajra arhats could not attack. It was as if his palm was a natural chasm that they could not cross. Tachibana Wakako saw so many Vajra arhats surrounding Li Yundong and attacking fiercely, but Li Yundong's figure did not move at all. He stood as steady as a mountain, as if he had not used his full strength at all. Tachibana Wakako was shocked and angry. She shouted and slammed the flag in her hand on the floor. In an instant, All the talisman flags on the flag stood up. The surrounding Vajra arhats twisted their bodies in an instant, turning from big to small, turning into small balls of light one after another, quickly flying toward Tachibana Wakako. Very quickly, these balls of light gathered together and suddenly turned into a giant Buddha that was about 2.5 meters tall. The crowd saw that the great Buddha was wearing a white kasaya and a golden crown. He had 1 head and 4 arms, and he was riding a golden peacock. Behind him was the peacock's tail, which was colorful like a magnificent pagoda. Those who knew him cried out in horror, "This is Mahamayuri." Ziyuan also widened her eyes and said in shock, "This is Mahamayuri worshipped by the Kongabuji temple of Mount Koya. Oh my god, this Tachibana Wakako can summon such a powerful god. This is too exaggerated, isn't it?" Everyone saw that Mahamayuri had a benevolent and peaceful face. His hands were in the emblematic gesture of Baisajayaguru Tathagata. He looked solemn, and there was not a trace of evil aura all over his body. At first glance, people felt a sense of worship. How could they dare to have any hostility? At this time, all the cultivators present thought with great fear, is it really the end of our Chinese cultivation world? This little Japanese girl can summon Mahamayuri? She was just a little witch, but what about the goddesses above her? What can she summon? At this time, Shinsiu, who was on the sidelines, had already knelt down with a thud. His face was full of excitement, and his eyes were fanatical as he worshipped Mahamayuri. Xinyan, who was beside him, was also trembling with excitement. He put his palms together and chanted the name of Buddha in a low voice. He said, "Amitba, Tachibana Wakako is actually comprehending the mystery at this time and stimulating all the potential of her bloodline. God bless Mount Koya, and God bless our Xinyan Tantrism." At this time, Tachibana Wakako was like a god looking down at the small common people. She shouted coldly, "In front of the true God, kneel down." Tachibana Wakako's voice was buzzing, as if countless eminent monks were chanting Buddhist scriptures at the same time, shaking the surrounding air and making visible ripples. Li Yundong remained motionless. He smiled slightly and said, "What is a true god? What is a false god?" Tachibana Wakako was furious. She sneered and said, "You won't repent." She pointed her finger, and Mahamayuri suddenly appeared in front of Li Yundong. With a flip of his palms, he slapped down on the top of Li Yundong's head. Everyone saw that as soon as Mahamayuri's palm turned over, it was as if Buddha had turned over his palm. The sky seemed to be about to collapse. Some people even subconsciously shrank their necks, for fear that the palm would hit their heads. Li Yundong watched helplessly as the sky-flipping palm came toward his head. He still didn't dodge. He smiled slightly and raised his palm. Boom! Everyone felt that the sky and earth were shaking. The palm of Mahamayuri stopped an inch in front of Li Yundong's palm again, as if it had been blocked by the invisible chi wall in front of Li Yundong, unable to move forward at all. Li Yundong smiled and looked at Mahamayuri, who had amazing Buddhist power and was tall and mighty. He smiled lightly, as if what he had blocked was not a terrible god in the world, but a child playing around. At this time, everyone suddenly widened their eyes and looked at Li Yundong in disbelief. They could understand that Li Yundong had used his powerful Jinqi to protect the spiritual platform and prevent the Yin Qi of 100 ghosts from approaching him. They could also understand that Li Yundong had used his amazing fighting strength to block the fierce attack of the Vajra Arhot. However, they couldn't understand why Li Yundong could block such an amazing Mahamayuri so easily. Mahamayuri was one of the famous wisdom kings. He represented the power of Buddha. How could Li Yundong be able to block it? This was too terrifying, wasn't it? Tachibana Wakako was also shocked by Li Yundong's ghost-like performance. She said in horror, "This is impossible. Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "I'm Li Yundong, just a nobody in the Chinese cultivation world." Tachibana Wakako said angrily, "Be *****starred." She gritted her teeth and let out a sharp roar. The Mahamayuri in front of Li Yundong instantly turned into a colorful stream of light and poured into her body. In an instant, Tachibana Wakako's figure suddenly floated up. Her clothes fluttered without any wind, and her eyes emitted a dazzling white light. The surrounding air was constantly twisting and rubbing, constantly making crackling electric currents and explosions. Everyone was shocked. They knew that Tachibana Wakako was going to risk her life. Ziyuan also clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. This is the highest summoning skill of a witch. Both Su Chan and Zhou Qin subconsciously widened their eyes. They clenched their fists so hard that their fingernails dug deep into their flesh, but they couldn't feel any pain. At first, when Xinyan and Shinsu saw that Li Yundong had blocked Mahamayuri's earth-shattering blow, they immediately shouted in horror, "Impossible! This is absolutely impossible!" But soon, they saw that Tachibana Wakako had actually invited the power of Mahamayuri to herself, realizing the highest realm of a witch summoning a god. They were all ecstatic and laughed out loud. Xinyan laughed wildly and said, "It's God's will. It's really God's will." At this time, Tachibana Wakako was possessed by Mahamayuri. As soon as she opened her mouth, her voice was a mixture of male and female voices, as if the voice of Buddha was coming from the distant horizon. "In front of the true God, why don't you kneel down?" After that, she moved and waved her hands. In the blink of an eye, 2 arms became 4 arms, 4 arms became 8 arms, and soon there were countless arms. In her hands, she was holding a long sword, a treasure wheel, a vajra, a steel whip, a trident, and other weapons. She rushed toward Li Yundong aggressively. Li Yundong saw that Tachibana Wakako had attacked again and again. He had shown mercy, but not only did she not know how to retreat, but she even became more aggressive and attacked again and again. He suddenly became furious and shouted, "You don't know what's good for you." The Jinqi in Li Yundong's whole body suddenly burst out. A crack instantly appeared on his forehead, and a golden vertical pupil appeared. His yang spirit instantly came out of the vertical pupil and turned into the immovable Wisdom King with 3 heads and 6 arms, glaring angrily at him. The immovable Wisdom King sat on the lotus throne, which was burning with blazing flames. His whole body was wrapped in a ball of blue flames, making him look angry, ferocious, and terrifying. When Tachibana Wakako suddenly saw the immovable Wisdom King, she was so shocked that she stopped moving. She looked at the immovable Wisdom King in front of her, who was the leader of all Wisdom Kings and the king of all Wisdom Kings. She suddenly opened her mouth wide and couldn't say a word. Li Yundong was angry that Tachibana Wakako didn't know what was good for her. He turned his hand and slapped her on the forehead. Although Mahamayuri was also a great supreme Wisdom King, the immovable Wisdom King was the incarnation of Buddha Tathagata, the Wisdom King who commanded all the Wisdom Kings in the world. He suddenly collided with the immovable Wisdom King, as if he had seen his natural enemy. In the blink of an eye, his divine power dissipated and turned into countless colorful streams of light that gushed out of Tachibana Wakako's body and returned to the flag standing on the ground. Even Mahamayuri had to retreat, let alone the witch spirit in Tachibana Wakako's body. The ancestral witch spirit of Tachibana Wakako fled into the depths of Tachibana Wakako's divine sense in an instant and didn't dare to come out again. Tachibana Wakako also turned back into an innocent little girl. She looked at the angry, immovable Wisdom King with frightened eyes and slapped her with his palm. She suddenly lost all her resistance and consciousness. Subconsciously, she curled her lips and cried out in fear. Chapter 506. Go to WatchNet. Li Yundong's palm had originally wanted to take Tachibana Wakako's life, but when it hit her head, she was so scared that she burst into tears. The anger in Li Yundong's heart suddenly dissipated a lot. His palm stopped in front of Tachibana Wakako's forehead. His face was as cold as water, and he looked at her sternly. Are you convinced? Tachibana Wakako's face was full of horror, and tears fell down her face. She nodded like a chicken pecking rice. I'm convinced. Don't hit me. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Tachibana Wakako's crying made him feel like he was bullying a child, but his expression was still dignified. He stared at her coldly and asked, "Are there any masters in mainland China?" Tachibana Wakako raised her head and looked at the terrifying and majestic vertical eye on Li Yundong's forehead. Her teeth were chattering, as if a little sheep had seen a lion or a fierce tiger. She stammered and cried, "Yes, you are a master." Li Yundong nodded. He withdrew his palm, and the Yang spirit, which had turned into the immovable Wisdom King, quickly went back along his glaring vertical eye. Go to watch net. As soon as Li Yundong's Yang spirit entered his body, the vertical eye on his forehead slowly closed and gradually disappeared. Tachibana Wakako saw that Li Yundong's forehead was smooth, as if the terrifying Wisdom King's eye had never appeared. However, Tachibana Wakako no longer dared to underestimate Li Yundong, nor did she dare to be disrespectful or offensive to him. She looked at Li Yundong as if she had seen her natural enemy, and her eyes were full of awe and fear. In Buddhism, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha was the most powerful. Although the Tathagata Gautama Buddha had boundless Buddhist power, he was merciful and restrained himself from anger. He could even feed an eagle with his own body. Therefore, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha would not personally fight. Even if he encountered the monkey son, he would only teach him a lesson with a flip of his palm. However, if the Tathagata Gautama Buddha was attacked by demons and ghosts, or if he encountered the terrible difficulties of Buddhism, the Tathagata Gautama Buddha's anger would turn into Wisdom King's. In the world of Buddhist cultivation, whether it was ancient Indian Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, or Japanese Buddhism, these different schools of Buddhism recognized the Akalanatha as the most powerful Akalanatha. When other gods saw him, they would have to bow down to him. Japanese people had always worshipped the strongest, so most of the statues in the Kongabuji Temple in Ragoino were of the immovable Wisdom King. In the entire Ragoino Mountain Temple, all the statues were not as many as the statues of the immovable Wisdom King. Even the statue of Tathagata Buddha, who had the highest status, was not as many as the statues of the immovable Wisdom King. It could be said that Mount Koya was the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King. Tachibana Wakako had grown up in Mount Koya, and her awe and worship of the immovable Wisdom King had been deeply rooted in her heart. Therefore, when she suddenly saw the Wisdom King's Vazhen, she was immediately scared and lost any ability to resist. The most important thing was that the vertical eye on Li Yundong's forehead emitted a majestic and awe-inspiring light. This kind of light represented an overwhelming power, making her unable to move even if she wanted to be his enemy. In Tachibana Wakako's subconscious, a thought suddenly flashed through her mind. Is this person the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King? Otherwise, how could he have the divine power of the immovable Wisdom King's Vazhen? However, Tachibana Wakako could see his Wisdom King's vertical eye when facing Li Yundong, but the others behind Li Yundong could not see it. They did not know that what really deterred Tachibana Wakako was the Wisdom King's eye on Li Yundong's forehead. They only saw that Li Yundong's Yang spirit body suddenly turned into a statue of a god with 3 heads and 6 arms, and with a palm, he slapped at Tachibana Wakako, who was so scared that she burst into tears. Everyone was dumbfounded, and they couldn't help but laugh. They said, "It can't be, right? She was beaten to tears? What the hell? Don't you know how to bleed or not cry? What kind of cultivator is she? But she's just a little girl." Bah, what little girl? Have you ever seen a little girl be so powerful before? Could it be that this Tachibana Wakako is strong in appearance but weak in reality? Otherwise, how could Jinrenli be scared to tears before he even hit her? Bullshit. If you have the ability, go up and try it yourself. Tisk, do you think I don't want to? Isn't Jinrenli ahead of me? Damn it, you only know how to talk after the fact. If you have the ability, go and challenge Shinrenli now. What are you talking about? Don't you know that we shouldn't attack our own people? Bah, who shouted at Shinrenli just now? For a moment, everyone was talking at once. Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others, who had been watching the scene nervously, saw that Li Yundong had subdued the extremely powerful witch, Tachibana Wakako, with one palm. They immediately shouted excitedly, and the little foxes were even more excited, as if their leader was in the limelight on the field, which was even more satisfying and happy than if they were in the limelight themselves. One of the little foxes shouted, "Long live the sect leader! Long live the sect leader for 10,000 autumns and 10,000 years! Unify the Jianghu!" The little foxes were used to laughing. Although they had been scolded by Li Yundong before, at this moment, they suddenly won a great victory. For a moment, they were so proud that they even shouted in unison, "Long live the leader! Long live the leader and unify the Jianghu!" When they shouted, Su Chan and Ruan Hongling didn't feel anything. Instead, they smiled, but Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were stunned at the same time. They quickly glanced at the cultivators of the various sects around them. Fortunately, at this time, the cultivators of the various sects were immersed in the joy of the victory, and not many people noticed this sentence. Ziyuan and Zhou Qin breathed a sigh of relief. After Li Yundong withdrew his palm, he said to Tachibana Wakako, "Let me tell you, there are countless hidden dragons and crouching tigers in China. Even I am not a master. You have never seen a real master, and neither have I. Therefore, don't look at the divine land with the eyes of a frog at the bottom of a well. Otherwise, you will only humiliate yourself." Tachibana Wakako wiped her tears and nodded subconsciously. "I see, I won't do it again." Li Yundong saw that she was crying pitifully. He was originally a person who had tender feelings for the fairer sex. His heart softened, and he sighed secretly. He turned to the cultivators of the various sects and said, "Everyone, I think we should just let this matter go. What do you think?" The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and thought to themselves, "You, Jinren, won this battle. Of course, you can say what to do." Everyone responded loudly, "Jinren, let's do as you say." Although the people of the Qingqing sect and the Jingyi school, who had been beaten the most miserably, were unwilling, at least Ziyuan had taught Shinsu a lesson. Li Yundong had also beaten their witch until she cried on the spot. Cultivators valued their reputation the most. They would rather die than lose face, so they also echoed, "Jinren, you make your own decision." Li Yundong nodded, then turned to Wang Jinyuan and said, "Master Wan, what do you think?" Wang Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong had won a great victory. Not only did he not pursue the previous coercion of the crowd, but he also took care of the faces of the major sections. The most surprising thing was that he was so respected by everyone. Not only was he not complacent, but he was also careful enough to turn around and ask for his opinion. It could be seen that this person's heart was beautiful and shrewd. He really couldn't be taken lightly. Wang Jinyuan was very vigilant. "I'm afraid that the old fox has chosen the wrong person. Li Yundong is young, but he has such a high bearing. I've never seen such a person in my life. Such a person will definitely not be willing to be controlled by others and be a puppet." Although Wang Jinyuan was alarmed in his heart, he said with a smile on his face, "Jinren, you're really polite. With your divine power, you not only saved the face of the various sects in the cultivation world, but also won glory for the Chinese cultivation world. As a spectator, how can I say anything?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "Master Wan, you are the host of this Taoist assembly. Of course, I have to listen to your opinion." Although Wang Jinyuan was on guard against Li Yundong, he still felt proud when he heard this. He was overjoyed and said with a smile, "Well, I'll say something for your reference." Jinren Li Yundong smiled and said, "Master Wan, please go ahead." Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, "Let the three pure ones become the three pure ones, and let the Buddha return to the Buddha. Let them go back to where they came from." Everyone laughed and shouted at Tachibana Wakako, Shinsyu, and Xinyan. Japanese, get out of here. Xinyan and Shinsyu were ashamed and angry at the same time. They stood where they were with red faces and ears. Xinyan shouted at Tachibana Wakako, Tachibana Wakako, let's go. Tachibana Wakako lowered her head, put away her powerful magical weapon, and then walked toward Xinyan with small steps. But after a few steps, she turned around and muttered as if she wanted to ask Li Yundong something, but when the words came to her mouth, she swallowed them back. Tachibana Wakako looked at Li Yundong in awe. Finally, she turned around and walked to Xinyan with small steps. She lowered her head and followed him down the small building. As she walked, she repeatedly muttered in her heart, "Is he the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King?" Xinyan's face was livid, and he put his hands in his sleeves. When the three of them were far away, Xinyan turned his face and scolded Tachibana Wakako with an ugly expression. "Baka. Tachibana Wakako, how can you lose without fighting? You were actually scared to tears by him. You really lost face for our Mount Koya. Did you stay in the Okunin for nothing? Can't the power of the ancestral gods give you the courage to fight? If I were you, I would have committed suicide on the spot. This is really a great shame that I haven't seen in 100 years." Tachibana Wakako's eyes were full of tears when she was scolded by Xinyan. She couldn't help arguing in a loud voice, "But this guy is too strong. I'm no match for him." Xinyan flew into a rage. How strong can he be? Isn't it just a young spirit statue with 3 heads and 6 arms? That's what he visualized. The yang spirit of a Taoist cultivator can transform into any shape. It only has the appearance, but it doesn't have divine power. How can you be so easily frightened? You disappoint me so much. Shinsyu, who had been silent all this time, couldn't help but blame. "Miss Tachibana Wakako, it's not that I want to criticize you, but although you are a witch, you are also the best of the warriors who have inherited the spirit of our Yamato people. How can you lose without fighting?" Tachibana Wakako cried, but there is also a vertical pupil on his forehead. As soon as the spirit of Mahamayuri that I summoned saw his vertical pupil, it went back into the 8-part divine streamer. The spirit of the ancestors which also didn't dare to come out. What could I do? Xinyan was stunned. There is also a vertical pupil on his forehead? Tachibana Wakako said loudly, "Yes, the gaze in the vertical pupil on his forehead is too scary. I just took a look at it, and I couldn't move." Xinyan was shocked. "Why didn't I see it?" Tachibana Wakako felt wronged by Xinyan's scolding. She shouted at Xinyan, "He has his back to you. Of course you can't see it." Xinyan looked at Tachibana Wakako in surprise. He couldn't help but take a deep breath. Vertical pupils can appear on his body? Is this the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King? Tachibana Wakako wiped her tears and said, "I think so too, but I didn't dare to ask." Xinyan's face darkened and he said in a low voice, "What Tachibana Wakako said is not impossible. Otherwise, why couldn't so many ghosts and Vajra get close to him just now? And why did Mahamayuri disappear automatically when he got close to him? If he wasn't the immovable Wisdom King, how could he resist the power of a true god like Mahamayuri?" Shinsyu, who was standing to one side, was stunned. When he thought that he had wanted to challenge the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King before, he couldn't help but shudder. He stammered, "Is this man named Li Yundong really the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King? How did the immovable Wisdom King worshipped by Arjunyan Tantrism reincarnate into the Chinese cultivation world? Could it be that he wants to destroy Aragoino?" Xinyan's face was very ugly. He advised, "Shinsyu, don't think too much. Even if there are masters in China, there is no need to worry because no matter how powerful Li Yundong is, there will be someone to help us deal with him. Chinese people like internal strife, which is a deep-rooted habit and national character. For them, the real trouble is not outsiders like us, but their own people, even this Li Yundong." After that, he sighed, stroked Tachibana Wakako's hair, and said softly, "I'm sorry, Tachibana Wakako, I misunderstood you." Since this Li Yundong is the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, it's useless no matter how powerful you are. Let's go back first. When we go back, tell Zongbinshan the news of the reincarnation of the immovable Wisdom King, and then we'll think of a way. Just as Xinyan, Tachibana Wakako, and Shinsu were discussing countermeasures, the cultivators, who had lost the threat of foreign aggression, suddenly found themselves in a dilemma. Previously, they had forced Li Yundong to withdraw from the Taoist assembly, but at this time, 3 Japanese had appeared and defeated them. If Li Yundong hadn't turned the tide in the end, they would have lost all face in this Taoist assembly. But what if Li Yundong threatened them to participate in the Taoist assembly again with the grace of a great victory? This guy's fighting methods were already so terrifying, and he had such a powerful magical weapon. From now on, who in the world could be his opponent? Li Yundong was already so powerful at such a young age. What would happen if he cultivated for a few more years? Could it be that it was really, as those fox spirits had said, unified Jianghu for thousands of years? The joy of the cultivators of all sects gradually faded, and everyone fell into deep thought and struggle. Chapter 507. Go to watch net. As soon as Xinyan and the others left, Li Yundong keenly felt that the atmosphere in the field had changed significantly. All kinds of suspicion, fear, awe, and admiration were surging toward Li Yundong like a flood. Go to watch net. For a moment, no one spoke. The cultivators of all sects were afraid that Li Yundong would say that he wanted to continue to fight, but because of Li Yundong's previous help, no one was willing to stand up and be the villain. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Yundong figured out the key to it. He smiled slightly and cupped his hands to Wang Jinyuan, who was beside him. Master Wan, since the Japanese have left, let's continue with the Taoist assembly. Please continue to fight. I'll just watch from the side. When Wang Jinyuan saw that Li Yundong had taken the initiative to ask to fight, his evaluation of Li Yundong immediately increased. He said with some admiration, "Jinren Li, aren't you going to fight?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Since I've already said that I won't fight, I naturally can't fight again. No matter what happens, there can be no exception. Moreover, defeating the Japanese is a matter of justice for cultivators. This is a public matter, while what we decided at the Taoist assembly is a private matter. As a person, we can't abandon the public for private reasons, nor can we abandon the public for private reasons." Wang Jinyuan couldn't help but form a palm with one hand and salute Li Yundong. He praised, "Amit Ba. Jinren Li is young and promising. Not only are you good at fighting, but your cultivation is also amazing. What's more, you are broad-minded and elegant. I admire you." Li Yundong smiled slightly and returned the salute. "Master Wan, you're too polite." After that, he walked down the stage slowly. Li Yundong walked to his seat and saw that Su Chan, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others were all smiling brightly, as if they were welcoming a victorious general. Su Chan even gave him a thumbs up with a smile, and said with a smile, "Yundong, you're so powerful. It's a pity that the immortal pen is gone." Wan Hongling also sighed and said, "Yes, these unscrupulous guys forget morality at the sight of profit and repay kindness with enmity. Without Li Yundong, they wouldn't have been able to raise their heads in the future. Now you still have selfish thoughts and want to get the immortal pen. Humph, who do you think you are?" Li Yundong smiled disapprovingly and said, "You can't say that. Me taking the immortal pen is just the icing on the cake. They taking the immortal pen is a timely help. Moreover, the reason why I stood up was for Ziyuan's sake and for the sake of our Chinese cultivation world. It's not for this immortal pen."
You can't be mistaken about this.
Ziyuan also nodded and said with admiration, "Li Yundong has handled this matter very well. He is generous and has the demeanor of a great cultivator." Wan Hongling blinked, glanced at Ziyuan, and then at Li Yundong. She covered her mouth and said with a smile, "Well, you only know how to speak up for him. Fine, fine, I'm the villain, okay? Ziyuan glared at Wan Hongling and scolded with a blushing face. Shut up. Wan Hongling immediately cried out in grievance. I didn't say anything. Can I say that I'm the villain? Ziyuan was so ashamed and angry that she stepped on Wan Hongling under the table. Wan Hongling immediately cried out and shouted, Someone stepped on me. Li Yundong, you have to uphold justice. Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, Keep your voice down. Everyone is watching. Wan Hongling quickly glanced around. Sure enough, she saw all kinds of eyes looking at them. Wan Hongling then changed her expression and said to Li Yundong in a low voice, Hey, there's nothing to see next, right? Why don't we leave? Zhou Qin also whispered, Yes, Master, we've watched so many battles. I don't think there will be any high-level battles next. Why don't we leave? I feel that there's something wrong with the way these people are looking at us. It's weird. Li Yundong looked around, thought for a moment, and said, Well, since you all say so, let's go back. As he said this, he was about to stand up, but he saw Wang Jinyuan sigh to the crowd and say, Fellow Taoists, I, Wang Jinyuan, would like to apologize to you for what happened. If I hadn't asked these Japanese to come up, such a thing wouldn't have happened. Although the cultivators of the various sects agreed with him, they all said, Master Wan, you can't say that. It's these Japanese who came uninvited. If we force them out, maybe these Japanese will say that our Chinese cultivation world is not magnanimous and can't tolerate them. Yes, Master Wan, this is not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself. Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, Thank you for your magnanimity, but I am more or less responsible for this matter. It's not right if I don't apologize. Everyone also laughed, and Deng Chong also joined in and joked, Sect Master Wan, since you feel ashamed, then hurry up and ask the little girl who sang just now to sing 2 more songs for us. Everyone burst into laughter and clamored, That's right, Sect Leader Wan. Let that chick sing 2 more songs. Wang Jinyuan laughed and saw that the little girl who had sung before was standing timidly in the corner near the back door with a peepa in her arms. Like a frightened deer, she looked at the cultivators on the field vigilantly and nervously. Wang Jinyuan waved at her with a smile and said, Xiao Qiao, come here. Everyone is waiting for you to sing Pingtan. The girl named Xiao Qiao walked over timidly with the peepa in her arms. She glanced at the crowd with her watery eyes and then lowered them in panic, like a mimosa. Deng Chong laughed and said, Xiao Qiao? Are you Xiao Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring? Wang Jinyuan smiled and said to Xiao Qiao, Would you like to introduce yourself to the seniors of all sects? Xiao Qiao lowered her head and stared at her shoes. She didn't dare to raise her head. She said in a crisp voice, My name is Song Yu Qiao, and I'm Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring, not Qiao from Copper Sparrow Spring. When the cultivators of all sects heard her speak, their clear and delicate voice made them feel as if they had eaten a ginseng fruit. There was a refreshing feeling in their pores. Deng Chong pointed at Song Yu Qiao and said with a smile, Little girl, you weren't shy just now. Why are you so shy now? Song Yu Qiao's whole body trembled almost imperceptibly. She looked up at the crowd and immediately lowered her head even more. Everyone burst into laughter. Although Wang Jinyuan felt a little strange, he still smiled and tried to smooth things over for Song Yu Qiao. He said, This is a new outer disciple of our Gazao sect. She may not have seen much of the world, so she may have been a little afraid when she saw you fighting just now. So please don't be offended. Everyone laughed and said, It's not strange at all. It's already very good that she can immediately sing Pingdan after seeing such a frightening fight just now. Some cultivators laughed loudly and said, Master Wan, let me have your disciples. Wang Jinyuan looked at the person who had spoken with a smile and said, Are you looking for a disciple or a wife? Everyone laughed, and Song Yu Qiao was so shy that her face turned red. Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, Everyone, please let this little disciple of mine go. Besides, if you want to listen to a song, let her sing. We don't need to be long-winded. Everyone agreed in unison. Deng Chong touched his bald head and said to Song Yu Qiao with a smile, Xiao Qiao, what are you singing? Song Yu Qiao whispered, It depends on what you want to hear. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito. If it weren't for the fact that everyone present was a good cultivator, they probably wouldn't have been able to hear her at all. Wang Jinyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said to the crowd, "Everyone, just now, Jinrenli showed his divine power and drove away these arrogant Japanese. We haven't thanked him yet. Why don't we ask Jinrenli to choose a song as our thanks?" Everyone immediately said in unison, "That's a good idea." Wang Jinyuan said to Li Yundong with a smile, "Jinrenli, don't stand on ceremony. Just choose one." Li Yundong saw that everyone was looking at him, so he didn't stand on ceremony. He smiled slightly and said, "Well, what are you best at?" When Song Yuqiao heard Li Yundong's gentle voice, it was as if a warm current had flowed into her heart, making her involuntarily want to trust him. She boldly raised her head and looked at him, only to see that the man who had been like a god in the fight was smiling at her. His eyes were as approachable as the sunshine in April. Song Yuqiao couldn't help but feel a little curious. She thought to herself, "Master said that Li Yundong is the best person in the world who helps a villain do evil. He is lustful, violent, and arrogant. But why do I feel that he is a daring, responsible, loyal, and skilled man?
Could it be that
Master was wrong? No. Master couldn't have been wrong. Maybe I was wrong." Song Yuqiao stared at Li Yundong in a daze and forgot to reply for a moment. When everyone saw this, they laughed and said, "Master Wan, your little disciple is in love." Song Yuqiao suddenly came to her senses after being teased by them. She was so shy that her ears seemed to be dripping blood. She whispered, "The legend of the white snake is what I'm best at." When Li Yundong heard this, he thought to himself, "Why is this girl singing songs about subduing demons?" He didn't take it to heart, so he said with a smile, "Well, you can sing this." Song Yuqiao didn't dare to look at Li Yundong again. She held the pipa and bowed to everyone, then sat down. At this time, a Pington woman with a sanxian in her arms came out from the back door and sat down beside her. Seeing that everyone's attention was focused on the two of them, Wang Jinyuan smiled slightly, turned around, and walked out of the back door. As soon as he went out, he turned a corner, walked through 2 long corridors, and came to a classical wooden house. He pushed the door open and walked in. As soon as Wang Jinyuan entered the door, he saw a tall man leaning against a window, his eyes fixed on the outside, as if he was looking at the singing building in the distance. After a while, a small paper crane flew into his hand. Wang Jinyuan asked in a deep voice, "Did you see it?" The man nodded slightly and didn't turn around. His figure was like a silent mountain, giving people a strong sense of pressure. Wang Jinyuan snorted coldly and said, "Are you sure you can control such a person? Can you imagine how powerful and terrifying a cultivator who can dispel Mahamayuri in a fight is?" The man was silent for a long time, then sighed softly. From the day he set foot on the Qinghai, Tibet Plateau, I could vaguely feel that his future was limitless, but I still underestimated him. Wang Jinyuan asked, "Are you sure you want to continue with your plan?" The man didn't comment. He said in a deep voice, "The arrow is on the bowstring, and it has to be shot. Don't worry, I have a way." Wang Jinyuan looked at the man's back with uncertain eyes and said slowly, "You'd better be sure. Otherwise, if you fail, I will fall out with you." With that, he snorted and turned to leave. Only this person was left in the room, looking at the small paper crane in his hand with a smile. With a shake of his palm, the small paper crane flew up with a whoosh and flew in the direction of the melodious sound of Pingtan. The man's lips curled into a meaningful smile. The show has just begun.
8, yeah.
Chapter 508. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong selected The Legend of the White Snake, he turned to Su Chan and the others and said with a smile, "She asked me to select a song. I can't just leave, can I? At least listen to it." Ziyuan smiled and said, "Well, it's rare to see such a high-level Pingtan. Go to watch net. 7th KOM This girl may have been in primary school, and I don't know which famous teacher she studied under. Zhou Qin asked curiously, why did she join the Gazao sect? Ziyuan smiled and said, now all the sects are secretly expanding their strength. Jingyi School is busy gathering the branches of the sect, and Qiuanzhen Dragon Sect is busy collecting the ancient books and Taoist magic that have been scattered in the cultivation world. As for the Gazao sect, it is desperately making money and then trying its best to develop its believers. Although there aren't many masters from the Gazao sect in this year's Taoist assembly in the cultivation world, the Gazao sect is the richest, and they also have the most external disciples. They can be said to be full of talents. Su Chan couldn't help but sigh. Yundong, when will we be able to sell medicine? How nice it would be to make money and buy such a big garden. Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at her. He scratched the tip of her nose with his fingertip and scolded her in a low voice. You wicked girl, you are too greedy. We used to live in a small rental house, and we were happy, weren't we? Later, we lived in a big house with 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms. Weren't you also very happy? Later on, it was changed to a large compound house. But now, you little girl, you're eyeing this kind of small garden. Do you think I run a bank? Su Chan grabbed Li Yundong's arm and said with a coquettish smile, I was just saying. As long as I'm with you, I'll be happy even if I have to live on the streets. If I can't be with you, even if I live in the palace, it will be like a year for me. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. He tapped the tip of the little girl's crystal pink nose and said with a smile, you're good at talking. But no matter how useless I am, I won't let you live on the streets, will I? Su Chan nodded hard with a smile and said, of course. My Yundong is a great hero. Li Yundong couldn't help but recall that when the two of them were at their lowest point, Su Chan had loudly declared to the landlord and Rongguifa that she would definitely become a great hero in the future. Thinking back to the scene at that time, and then thinking back to the scene in front of him, Li Yundong really felt like a lifetime had passed. He chuckled and lovingly stroked the little girl's hair. Silly girl, what kind of hero am I? Su Chan said with a serious face. Why isn't he a hero? No one here was a match for the Japanese. You were the only one who drove them away, bringing glory to the Chinese cultivation world. What else could you be, if not a hero? Zhou Qin also nodded and looked at him with admiration, saying, that's right. If it weren't for you, master, who turned the tide, I'm afraid we would have lost face this time. Li Yundong shook his head and said with a smile, it's just a coincidence. There are countless masters in the divine land. Even if we lose today, we can win tomorrow. The Japanese cultivation world is blessed by nature and has a quiet and stable cultivation environment. Especially this time, they came prepared, so they caught all the sects by surprise. But after all, their population is small and their territory is small. Moreover, their cultivation world originated in the Tang dynasty, while our cultivation world can be traced back to the time of Pengzu and Laozi, which is 1 or 2,000 years earlier than them. Li Yundong said with a sigh, although our cultivation world has suffered all kinds of blows and has declined so far, after all, it has been passed down for thousands of years. As the saying goes, a skinny camel is still bigger than a horse. In terms of a deep foundation and a large number of talents, the Japanese cultivation world is far from being comparable to us. They can win for a while, but they can't win for a lifetime. Ziyuan also nodded and said, that's right. As far as I know, most of the masters of the Jingyi school this time are masters of the younger generation. The only one who can represent the older generation is Zhang Ling. And Zhang Ling's magic must be earth-shattering. If she had fought just now, she might not have lost to Tachibana Wakako. However, in such a busy city, she couldn't use 10% of her ability, so she was very worried and didn't go on stage. Moreover, not only the Jingyi school, but the older generation of cultivators of the Qiuanzhen Dragon Sect, Qingqing Sect, Jinshan Sect, and other sects are also very powerful. It's just that most of them cultivate in seclusion and hardly walk in the world. Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, a centipede is dead but not stiff. What's more, the cultivation world can be said to be full of talents now. I believe that it won't be long before there will be a few great cultivators. When Li Yundong said this, he looked at Zhou Qin. It was obvious that he was encouraging and appreciating her. Zhou Qin's heart warmed up, and she nodded vigorously. Wan Hongling, who was beside her, said with a smile, Li Yundong, you even praised yourself, didn't you? After this Taoist assembly, you can also be regarded as a great cultivator, right? Shiji Ziyuan, don't you think so? Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, in terms of fighting strength and reputation, Li Yundong can indeed be called a great cultivator. Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, don't flatter me. I haven't even cultivated to the Jinshin phase. How dare I call myself a great cultivator? Those who have cultivated to the Jinshin phase have yang spirits that are truly indestructible. No magical weapon in the world can kill them. Only such cultivators can be called great cultivators. I'm still far from that. Su Chan said seriously, Yundong, you will definitely become a great cultivator, and your speed will be very fast. Think about how long you've been cultivating, and now you're already so powerful. Li Yundong smiled and said, to cultivate to the Jinshin phase, one must have the help of Diuan Jindan. Without a great opportunity, one can't cultivate. While they were talking, they saw that Song Yuqiao had already tuned the strings. She coughed softly, cleared her throat, and then began to sing softly. As soon as everyone heard her speak, they immediately quieted down. For a moment, there was no sound in the small building. Everyone looked at Song Yuqiao with bright eyes and held their breath. Song Yuqiao's 5 fingers were gently twisted, and her diamond-shaped red lips were gently opened and closed. She sang in a soft and beautiful voice. The West Lake is here again today, and the past is painful to think about. Through ups and downs, we cross the boat together, and we see the sincerity of Su Hanwen. It's rare for an official to have such good feelings, and to respect and pity each other is a blind date. Who would have thought that good flowers would meet merciless rain, and the bright moon would meet thousands of miles of clouds? Now the flowers have fallen, and the moon is not clear. I can't bear to look back on the old feelings. I only hate Monk Fa Hai, who is a monk who meddles in other people's affairs and breaks up the lovers. Song Yuqiao's voice was soft but crisp, charming but clear, especially when she was shy and speechless before. But when she sang Pingtan, she suddenly forgot all her shyness. Her expression was sad, and her eyes were sad and moving. Even those who didn't understand the lyrics could instantly get into the mood of the lyrics and music. Li Yundong saw that Song Yuqiao was singing an excerpt from the legend of the White Snake. He couldn't help laughing and said, what a coincidence. I have Fa Hai's burning thumb pot in my hand. It must have been this burning thumb pot that dealt with the White Snake that year. Now that it's in my hands, who do you think I'll deal with? Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, anyway, don't deal with me. Li Yundong laughed and moved closer to Su Chan. Little girl, if you don't listen to me, I'll teach you a lesson, he said in a low voice. Su Chan's ears turned red. She giggled and said, you're so annoying. The two of them were talking intimately, as if there was no one else around. Song Yuqiao had already finished singing the play. At this time, the people upstairs were cheering loudly. There were also cultivators who shouted, it's good, but it's a little too miserable. Sing something cheerful. After Song Yuqiao finished singing, she became extremely shy again. She lowered her head and said softly, then wait for me to go in and change before I come out. As she spoke, she walked towards the back door with light steps. Everyone laughed and said, this little girl is not young, but she's quite arrogant. She wants to go in and change her clothes after singing a cheerful song. After a while, Song Yuqiao came out from the back. Everyone saw that she hadn't changed her table much. She was just wearing a pair of gold hairpin jewelry on her head. The gold hairpin was strung with a bright flower. The flower was colorful. There were all kinds of colors. It looked bright and dazzling. She walked over gracefully, and there was a fragrance on her body, which was intoxicating. Song Yuqiao sat down with the pipa in her arms. After a while, She said, "Everyone wants to listen to a cheerful song, but I have only learned a cheerful song. Moreover, the master who taught me to sing once told me that if I wanted to sing this song, I had to worship her first before I could sing it." The cultivation world respected teachers the most. When everyone heard this, they were all in awe and said one after another, "Good, filial disciple. It's rare, it's really rare." After Song Yuqiao got up, she said to Wang Jinyuan apologetically, "Master Wan, I'm really sorry. Can I go burn some incense?" Wang Jinyuan had never heard Song Yuqiao mention this rule before. Although he felt it was strange, he didn't take it to heart. He smiled and said, "Of course." Song Yuqiao got up again, walked to the back hall, and came in with an incense burner in both hands. Everyone saw that there were 3 sticks of incense on the incense burner. Green smoke curled up, and the fragrance was pleasant. Song Yuqiao bowed to the incense burner, then sat back in her seat. She gently plucked the strings of the zither with her fingers and began to sing softly again. The clouds think of cloves, the flowers think of beauty, the spring breeze brushes the railings, and the dew is thick. If we don't meet at the top of the Jade Mountain, we will meet under the moon at the Yaodai. A branch of red dew condenses the fragrance, and the Wushan Mountain is broken in vain. Who in the Han Palace looks like it? Pitiful swallows rely on new makeup. Famous flowers fall in love with each other, and the emperor looks at them with a smile. Explaining the infinite hatred of the spring breeze, the Agarwood Pavilion leans north to dry. Li Jiandong listened to her sad singing, like a resentful woman in her boudoir. Where was the slightest joy? He couldn't help but ask, curiously, "What kind of song is this? Why doesn't it sound cheerful at all?" Ziyuan's face was also full of doubts. She said, "This is Ing worships to the moon. It's strange. This song is very sad. How is it cheerful?" Not only did Li Jiandong and Ziyuan feel strange, but the cultivators of all the sects upstairs also felt very strange. They all said, "Hey, such a sad song. How is it cheerful?" "Little girl, did you sing wrong?" Wang Jinyuan couldn't help frowning and saying, "Xiao Qiao, what are you singing?" Song Yuqiao lowered her head and did not speak, but a cold woman's voice suddenly came from not far away. "Aren't you happy? But I feel very cheerful." Everyone looked up and saw a beautiful and coquettish woman standing at the back door, looking at them with a sneer on her face. As soon as Li Jiandong, Su Chan, and the others saw this woman, they were shocked. Su Chan said in surprise, "Isn't this Shibua Zhuang Yuting? Why is she here?" My cousin and his niece came home today. Sorry, the update is late. There should be one more chapter, but don't wait, it will be very late. Vote recommendation, previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 509. Go to WatchNet. They all looked surprised. Go to WatchNet. But soon they came to their senses. There was a cold and sarcastic smile on Zhuang Yuting's face, which made their hearts skip a beat. They thought to themselves, "No. What's wrong with Shibua Zhuang Yuting?" When the little fox's eyes met Zhuang Yuting's, they immediately screamed in their hearts, "No, this is not Shibua Zhuang Yuting." Zhuang Yuting's eyes were full of hatred, as if she wanted to cut everyone in the Fox Zen school into pieces. The little foxes looked at Zhuang Yuting in horror. They had vaguely guessed what was going on, but no one dared to say it out loud. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects upstairs had no idea what had happened in the Fox Zen school. Some of them didn't know Zhuang Yuting, so they frowned and scolded. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Some cultivators who had gone to Mount Tianlong to participate in the siege of the Fox Zen school recognized Zhuang Yuting at a glance. They shouted at Li Yundong, "Zhenren Li, how do you discipline your subordinates?" Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yuting with a cold face and said in a cold voice, "She is not my subordinate. nor is she a member of the Fox Zen school. The people who had spoken were stunned and didn't understand what Li Yundong meant. Wang Jinyuan frowned and said to Zhuang Yuting, "You should be Jinren Zhuang of the Fox Zen school, right? Today, for the sake of Jinren Li, I won't argue with you.
Please sit down on the sidelines."
Zhuang Yuting laughed and said, "Wang Jinyuan, what right do you have to yell at me? I beat you up on Mount Gazao, and you couldn't even raise your head. Have you forgotten?" Wang Jinyuan's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly opened his eyes wide and said in surprise, "You are Yan Fang?" When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. Yan Fang? Yan Fang of the Linggong sect. It can't be. There were also some young cultivators who didn't know Yan Fang's reputation. They quickly asked, "Who is Yan Fang? Is she very powerful?" Immediately, an old and experienced cultivator said, "Hey, boy, listen carefully. Yan Fang was a famous female cultivator in the past. Before Yan Fang disappeared, she had always been known as the #1 master among female cultivators and also the #1 beauty. It wasn't until she suddenly disappeared one day that the title of the #1 female cultivator in the world slowly fell to Ziyuan." Then why did Yan Fang suddenly disappear? Hey, Yan Fang is so arrogant that she doesn't like any man in the world. She only has a crush on her Shixiang Wang Yuanshan, but her Shixiang Wang Yuanshan fell in love with Ao Wushuang of the Fox Zen school in the end. As a result, in a fit of anger, Yan Fang exposed their relationship to Celestial Master Zhang, the head of the Jingyi school, and forced Wang Yuanshan to leave Ao Wushuang with the powerful power of the sect. Yan Fang originally thought that she could save her love this way, but the result was exactly the opposite. Wang Yuanshan would rather choose immortalization than her. Yan Fang is so powerful and is known as the #1 beauty. Why didn't Wang Yuanshan choose her? Why did he choose a vixen? Feske kid, you don't understand. Look at those vixens next to her. Which one of them isn't a stunner? TSK, if a man can have a companion, he will be as happy as a god. The feeling is really indescribable. Martial uncle, the way you speak is so lewd. Ahem, cut the crap. Yan Fang saw that Wang Yuanshan refused to turn back, so she thought that it was all because the vixen of the Fox Zen school had used a hypnosis method to charm her Shixiang and steal her marriage. Therefore, Yan Fang sneaked into the Fox Zen school in anger and hid for 9 years. A while ago, she suddenly appeared on Mount Tianlong. I see. It turns out that it was this Yan Fang. Was she the one who planned the siege of Mount Tianlong last time?
Yes.
She is worth teaching. If it weren't for Li Yundong, I'm afraid that the Fox Zen school would have been destroyed at that time. This Yan Fang is so vicious. In order to take revenge, she hid for 9 years and wanted to destroy the whole school. Haven't you heard of the saying that a woman's heart is the most vicious? Hey, this is the internal strife of the Fox Zen school. Let's watch the show. Well, watch the show. For a moment, everyone was talking about it. Those who knew Yan Fang greeted her loudly, but Yan Fang acted as if she didn't hear them. She just stared at Li Yundong. Zhang Ling, who had fought fiercely with Yan Fang on Mount Gazao last time, also had a strange light in her eyes. She looked at the woman in front of her, who was determined to destroy the Fox Zen school, in surprise and doubt. Zhou Ping whispered to Zhang Ling, "Master, there is internal strife in the Fox Zen school. Yan Fang is a member of our Jingyi school. Should we intervene later?" Zhang Ling shouted in a low voice, "Shut up. Yan Fang is a scheming woman. Since she dares to show up now, it means that she already has a backup plan and a perfect plan. Right now, it's best for us to wait and see." Li Yundong looked at Zhuang Yuting in shock and said, "So you are Yan Fang?" Yan Fang laughed and said, "That's right." Li Yundong, you didn't expect this, did you?" Li Yundong said in a cold voice, "What about Chao Yi? What did you do to her?" Yan Fang snorted coldly and said, "You'd better take care of yourself first." Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect was very clear about the hatred between Yan Fang and the Fox Zen school. He stood up and said to Yan Fang, "Jinren Yan, as the saying goes, It's better to get rid of enmity than to keep it alive. The grudges between you and the Fox Zen school have accumulated to this day, and both sides have suffered heavy losses. The Lingong sect is now in a state of decline, and Jinren Ziyuan can't support it alone. The Fox Zen school has been forced to leave their hometown, and countless people have died or been injured. Isn't it enough for you to take revenge to this extent? Why don't you stop? Yan Fong suddenly turned her head and glared at Du Fei. She scolded him sternly. Du Fei, what did you get from Li Yundong? Why are you speaking up for him like this? Du Fei said unhappily, Zhen Yan, I think you are blinded by a leaf and cannot see Mount Tai. Your eyes have been completely blinded by hatred. Jinren Li is open and above-board, selfless, generous, and elegant. I have never seen such a person in my life. And you, Jinren Yan, are also one of the weirdos in our cultivation world. I just want to preserve a little more vitality for our cultivation world, so I said something fair. What you said is an insult to me. Yan Fong stared at Du Fei coldly. She suddenly laughed and said, You idiot, you've been deceived by him, and you still don't know it. Besides, do you really think that I just want revenge? You underestimate me. Du Fei frowned and said, Then why are you doing this, Jinren Yan? Yan Fong suddenly pointed at Li Yundong and said loudly, Fellow Taoists, today I'll let you know the true face of Li Yundong. When Zhou Qin saw Yan Fong pointing at Li Yundong and scolding him loudly, she was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She gritted her teeth, and her eyes were full of anger and hatred. In her opinion, anyone who offended Li Yundong was her enemy. She secretly vowed in her heart that she would make Yan Fong pay the price. Su Chan and the little foxes were also shocked and angry. They didn't know what kind of conspiracy Yan Fong had this time, nor did they know what kind of price they would have to pay this time. Li Yundong looked at Yan Fong coldly and said in a deep voice, Yan Fong, if you have something to say, just say it. I'd like to see what you're up to this time. Yan Fong sneered and said, It's hard to say who's up to this. After that, she said to the people present, Fellow Taoists, I admit that I, Yan Fong, sneaked into the Fox Zen school 9 years ago and really wanted to take revenge. I wanted to destroy the Fox Zen school because of personal grievances. Hearing this, everyone was silent and sighed inwardly. It was precisely because of this hatred that the two sects had withered and were almost in danger of being destroyed. Seeing that everyone was listening to her, Yan Fong continued, But when I sneaked into the Fox Zen school for the 3rd year, I suddenly found the secret treasure location of the Fox Zen school in Mount Tianlong. Once, I accidentally sneaked in and found the heavenly Jindan technique engraved on the rock wall by the mystical silver fox. Everyone was suddenly amazed. Zhou Ping and Zhang Ling looked at each other, and Zhou Ping immediately asked loudly, Shu Yan Fong, have you memorized the heavenly Jindan technique? Yan Fong glanced at her quickly, and there was a hint of sarcasm in her eyes. She simply said, No. Zhou Ping was a little annoyed by Yan Fong's gaze. She shouted, How is that possible? A cultivator like you can recite it backwards even if you read it once. Even if you didn't write it down at that time, you could write it down after you go back. How could you not remember it? Yan Fong sneered and said, Fellow Taoists, if the heavenly Jindan technique was placed in front of you, would you practice it? The cultivators of the various sects looked at each other and didn't speak. As cultivators, if they saw the heavenly Jindan technique in front of them, it was absolutely impossible for them not to practice it. There was no cultivator in the world who could control such a desire. Seeing that everyone was silent, Yan Fong sneered and said, By the way, when we cultivators see such a superior cultivation method, we will definitely find a way to practice it. But once I practiced the heavenly Jindan technique with the ability of that old fox, Lu Yi, how could he not notice it? Therefore, I didn't look at it at all. I only read a few words and then stopped. Hearing this, everyone was suddenly moved. They looked at Yan Fong in shock and thought to themselves, under the temptation of the heavenly Jindan technique, Yan Fong can even resist the temptation. It can be seen how strong her will is and how firm her will to take revenge is. Terrible, it's really terrible. Whoever has such an opponent will really have trouble sleeping and eating. At this time, Du Fei said, Jinren Yan, you said that you found a secret cave in the Fox Zen school and the heavenly Jindan technique, but what does this have to do with Jinren Li? What does it have to do with the Fox Zen school? Everyone knows that the mystical silver fox was invincible in the world at that time. Moreover, she happened to live in the period of Mr. Qin Pu, the author of the heavenly Jindan technique. Is it strange that she wanted to get the heavenly Jindan technique and engrave it on the stone wall of the sect? Yan Fong glanced at him and said with a sneer, Shinran Du is really protecting Li Yundong everywhere.
Hey.
Well, when I saw the heavenly Jindan technique, I was so shocked that I immediately refrained from reading it. But I saw that the last 2 sentences were written by the mystical silver fox on the stone wall. Everyone was curious and hurriedly asked, What is it? Tell me quickly. Yan Fong said loudly, the first sentence is, In the 15th year of Tang Shizong, Mr. Naiwen Chen Pu created the heavenly Jindan technique. This technique seizes the creation of heaven and earth and is an extraordinary secret treasure for cultivation. I yearn for it, but I can't get it. However, I spent all my effort traveling to the divine land. It took me more than 10 years to record it here, in the 3rd year of later Liang Qianhua. When everyone heard this, they secretly clicked their tongues in wonder. Some people whispered, It's said that there are a few great devils in the history of the cultivation world. The mystical silver fox is one of them. I didn't expect that the lost heavenly Jindan technique would be preserved by her. She is an anomaly, really an anomaly. Li Yundong also nodded slightly. He said to Yan Fong in a deep voice, There is indeed such a sentence. But so what?
Does it mean anything?
Yan Fong sneered and said, I haven't finished yet. There's another sentence. Li Yundong frowned and asked, What else? I didn't see the following sentence at that time. Yan Fong sneered and said, Are you blind? There's another sentence below. Everyone said loudly, Jinren Yan, tell us quickly. What's the other sentence? Yan Fong sneered and said loudly, This sentence is, Although I have practiced the heavenly Jindan technique to the 9th level, I have committed a divine retribution because of it. I think I will have to go through the retribution in a few days. If I fail, my soul will be scattered. Therefore, I left the heavenly Jindan technique here. I hope that in the future, the successor of our Fox Zen school can succeed and save my scattered soul from heaven and earth, so that I can reappear in the world. This sentence was tantamount to detonating an atomic bomb on the field. Everyone was so shocked that their faces changed greatly. Everyone stood up suddenly, and the scene suddenly became like a pot of boiling porridge. What? The mystical silver fox wants to reappear in the world? Is there such a conspiracy in the Fox Zen school? Jinren Li, make it clear. Is there such a thing? Even though Li Yundong was very calm, he was still shocked to the spot, but he quickly retorted angrily, It's impossible. There's no such sentence below. If you don't believe me, come back to Mount Tianlong with me now. Yan Fong sneered and said, Didn't you see it? I think you're pretending not to see it. Li Yundong, don't quibble. You're Lu Ye's accomplice.
He's dead.
Now, it's your turn to inherit his will. You just want to resurrect the mystical silver fox, don't you? As she spoke, she didn't wait for Li Yundong to catch his breath and said sternly, Since ancient times, when the 9-tailed celestial fox has descended into the world, has it not brought great disaster to the world? It was because of Daji's younger sister that there was the chaos of the Shang dynasty. It was because of the mystical silver fox that there was the tragedy of the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, as well as Buddhism and Taoism, fighting each other. We cultivators sealed the 9-tailed celestial fox, but I didn't expect that you would not change your mind. You still want to release the 9-tailed celestial fox at all costs. Do you want to confuse the world and bring disaster to the common people? Yan Fong's words were too powerful, and the power was no less than that of a dagger throwing a spear. All the cultivators of various sects looked at the people of the Fox Zen school coldly. Yesterday's update. Vote for recommendation previous page. Next page, error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Homes in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. You're tuning in to the Hanli's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.